Hey guys, welcome back to Magic TV. My name's Craig. It is 9 o'clock on a Saturday, which means it's time for a Talk Magic. And you know what? The person I've got on that I'm interviewing today, I've been wanting to interview this person since I began Magic TV for the simple reason he is one of the most successful acts, as far as I'm concerned, in the world. He's been there, he's done the t-shirt. I've seen him perform live so many times. He's worked with almost every single major company. He's a very prolific creator. He's done Penguin Lives, he's done Alakazam Academies, but as well as that, he's released products. But on top of all of that, he's got a very, very successful career as a performer. He literally travels the world, performing all over the world, and also he's one of the nicest people that you'll ever meet. And I can't wait to chat to him and talk more about his story because his story is very inspirational as well. Let's introduce the legend himself, Mr. Mark James. How you doing, Mark?
Hey, buddy. That was a hell of an intro. It's funny
Cheers.
when you hear people say things like that because you sort of think it doesn't feel like that. You know, when someone says so successful, busy performer, all these products, it never feels like that to you. It's amazing to hear what someone else's perspective is on your life because from inside of your own life, it doesn't feel like that's how it's going.
Yeah, but I could have made that introduction about 5 minutes longer because you've done so much. And you know what? And we'll talk about this. But one of the things that I've noticed with you is you're not afraid to roll your sleeves up and give it a go. Like there's so many things that I've seen. Like you've had multiple podcasts over the years. You've done, we were talking just off camera about the lectures that you ran in your house before COVID. It's like you've got that true.
Secret, secret lectures that I ran in my house before COVID.
Whoops, not anymore. But no, in all seriousness, like you've got that entrepreneurial mindset. Most people will have an idea and it will stay there. It will be an idea. But one thing I've noticed from about you, and although we know each other, we're not close friends, but I follow your career. And one thing that I've noticed is you are very entrepreneurial. Like there are so many, you're always announcing, right now, I'm going to do this, now I'm going to do this, now I'm going to be here, now I'm going to be there. And that doesn't happen by accident. You have to hustle and you have to follow through on the ideas that you have in order to be as busy as you are. Do you know what I mean?
I I get bored really easily, and I heard someone talking years ago. It might have been Gary Delaney, the comedian, who said something about there are writers who perform and there are performers who write. And I think that I'm in the former category in that I like to write things and I like to come up with ideas and I like to think of stuff. And I have a lot of ideas. And you just realize that if you don't do them yourself, nobody is going to do them. They'll just sit on a shelf. And I can't bear the thought that you've thought of something that you think somebody might enjoy or get value out of or whatever, and that nobody ever sees it. So the only way really to guarantee that your ideas get seen by somebody is to go out and do them yourself. So I think I'm probably a writer who performs rather than a performer who writes out of that necessity. But which is not to say I don't enjoy performing, but I do think that I'm just an ideas person. I'm always thinking about something and always reading the next thing, watching. I'm an obsessive devourer of content. My wife goes out of her mind that I go to the bathroom and I sit on the toilet and watch two YouTube videos. And then if I go into the kitchen to make a cup of tea, the second I stand up from the living room to walk into the kitchen, I put a podcast on and I listen to a podcast for 2.5 minutes while I make a cup of tea. And then I sit back down in the living room and I pause and go back to the thing we were watching. And I try to watch a movie, at least one movie every single day. I try to read for an hour every day. I just obsessively devour content. And I guess if your brain is any sort of machine for taking things in and outputting them again, if you take in a lot of stuff, eventually you will output a lot of stuff too. So there's no secret to it. I'm obsessed with what other people have created, and that leads to me wanting to make stuff too, I guess.
That's amazing. That's brilliant. And I want to get into that. I really do. But for anybody who's watching this that might not have seen you before or might not be aware of everything that you've accomplished,
The
I want
lucky ones.
to, well, I want to start at the very beginning because you've been there, done it all, bought the t-shirt. But when did you get into magic? Like, when did this all happen? It feels like you've been there forever. I mean, the first time I became aware of you was at Jokebox Magic, but I know that the story begins way before then. So, what was your origin story, Mark?
Well, I mean, I have a bit of an in and out magic story, really, in that when I was a little kid, I have a video of me being given a magic set by my uncle when I was a little kid. Maybe I was like 6 or 7 years old, and me excitedly, receiving this magic set. And I remember going to my grandmother's house as a little kid and having, that trick where it's like a little plastic box and you put a plastic coin in and you can put the nails through it, and there's
Yes.
kind of a thing where the coin tilts up and it allows you to do it. I remember owning that when I was really, really small. And then I don't remember magic being in my life again at all, really, until that first David Blaine special came out. And kind of everybody was doing that trick where you show the indifferent card, you turn it down, you put it on their hand, and they turn it over, and now it's their card, which I believe Simon Lovell called Fingered on his DVD set, or his book when it first came out, which in the UK is a hilarious title for any trick. If you're British and you know the other meanings of that word, but I think he called it that. So I would do that trick. I could do that, and I could do a double lift, and I could shuffle a card from the top of the deck to the bottom and back again when I was maybe 15, and that was kind of it. And then I went to drama school and I wanted to be a singer and a dancer, and I always grew up playing instruments. And so another kid at drama school was pretty good at magic, and he and I would kind of do card tricks every now and again. And then it slipped out of my head again, and I didn't really pick it up again until I was almost 19. And I was working at a Haven holiday park, and I was singing in a show production team and dancing and wearing costumes and being part of that. And one day we took a day trip to Blackpool, and the car parked up outside of JB Magic, and literally just, and it was funny to hear you call it joke box magic, because we always just called it JB. I actually would have forgotten that that's what it meant. But
Mm.
yeah, we parked outside of there, and we literally only parked there because we got lost. As anybody watching this will probably know if they've been to Blackpool Convention, when you get to Blackpool, there are kind of two ways you can go. And one of them goes to Blackpool North, and one of them goes to Blackpool South. And if you go down the south way, you go down that thin road with a wall on either side of it. It's called the Yeadon Way. And we accidentally went down there, and that led us to the road that JB Magic was on. So we parked outside because there was space, and a security guard who'd driven us there to Blackpool, that were all friends, said, "Let's go in this magic shop." And I was a bit sort of ambivalent about it, really, like, oh, okay, let's take a look. We went inside. Mark Mason was behind the counter, and Mark did to me what he does to everybody. He blew my mind, and showed me the greatest tricks I'd ever seen in my life. He made me laugh like I'd never laughed before. Mark once told me a story that I honestly, the only time in my life I've laughed until I actually peed myself was Mark Mason telling me a stupid story. He's one of the funniest people that you could ever meet. And so I was taken in by that. And I started to do magic then, really. I bought some tricks. I took them back to the holiday park. I did them on stage that night because I didn't know you were supposed to practice. I didn't, I've never really had that in me. And, people say practice until you can't get it wrong. I practice until I can barely do it. And then I put it on stage because I figure that if it goes wrong, the very worst thing I will be is a human being, and audiences respond to that really well. So I've never been afraid to just do something the first time as soon as I can do it, because I know that I'll learn more about the trick and its reality to me as a performer in that first time on stage than all the practice in the world. And that kind of started back then. I bought a trick. I'll tell you what it was. I bought, the dream bag where you show inside of the bag and
Yeah,
you
great
lift
trick.
out the three bags. I bought those. I bought no tear newspaper. I bought a milk pitcher. I bought the missing spade. You have the banner with three of spades and you produce the spade from behind. And I only bought that because in my first day at Haven as a team member, there was a visiting magician, and that magician was John Danbury. And I saw John Danbury do his act, and he did that trick, and I thought it was fantastic. And then I saw another magician, Martin James, doing the vanishing bandana, and I thought that was hilarious too. And I was actually quite heartbroken years later when I worked in the shop and I saw that trick for sale, because that's when I learned, oh, these tricks often don't belong to those performers. They're just doing a thing that they bought. Which is no slight on Martin or John. They both did those tricks really well, but that's when I understood that that's what the kind of situation was. So, yeah, I bought some tricks. I did them that night. I got a better response from those than I ever did singing. And I thought maybe there'll be something to this. So I started ordering magic through the mail, but I would literally get paid, go to the cash machine. Mark always laughs about it even now, 20 years later. I would put cash inside of an envelope and I would send it to JB Magic and then wait 4 or 5 days and wait for that magic to come back. And then I would read the instructions, do
Wow.
the trick on stage that night. And the one bonus, I guess, of working on holiday parks is that the guests change every Monday and Friday. So in the
Mhm.
midweek, you've got 4 nights where you can do a different trick every night. And then you can do the best three Friday, Saturday, Sunday again. And I did that every week for a season. And by the end, I had an act. And that was kind of it.
Wow, there's a lot to unpack there. Uh,
Yeah.
the first thing is, that's not your traditional origin story. I know that you dabbled when you were younger, but most people I speak to, they were like doing kid shows when they were 7 years old. They were like going out doing restaurant work when they were 15. It's kind of interesting to see that you kind of came into it a little bit later. But I'm assuming that as you worked in Haven on the entertainment team, you were always interested in performing because
Yeah.
it's a difficult gig to get. I was a red coat. I know how hard it is and the selection procedure is to be working in a holiday park like that. So you must have had a passion for entertainment. Do you
Well,
feel
yeah.
that that helped when you found magic? Do you feel that because you had that background in performance or that background in wanting to entertain people, it gave you an advantage when you started learning magic?
I think so. I mean, I was in shows from probably 12 years old, maybe even 11 years old in drama school. I was in Anything Goes and Hello Dolly and loads of kind of classic British musicals like that in a drama school. And I would sing and dance in those and I loved it. And then I went to a performing arts college and a music college and I played guitar and piano and bass and drums and all of those things all throughout college. And I was in a band in college too. So I was performing all the time and I would go to open mic nights and I would do solo gigs and sometimes I would do original material gigs and sing my own songs and things like that with a band and sometimes on my own. And I only ended up at Haven. I went there as a kid and I love Haven. Even now I love Haven. And it's one of my biggest clients to this day. I work for Haven and I work for Princess Cruises and then I do, dinner theaters and American shows and things like that. But I do a lot of Haven shows still. And so I'd gone there as a kid, and I was literally in the library of college one day with my friend, and this girl that I was basically in love with secretly, she didn't know, she sat down next to us, and she wanted to audition to go to Haven. And she said, I'm going to go and audition this Sunday. But we were all 17. She'd only just passed the driving test. So she asked me and my friend if we would go with her. And I said, straight away, like, yes. And then my friend said no. So the two of us went, and nothing romantic happened. But I only went because I secretly was in love with this girl. Shout out to Beth. And she asked me if I would play the guitar for her. And so I played the guitar and I played Everybody Hurts, the chorus version for her to sing. And then she got up, and the guy doing the audition said, Are you singing as well? And I said, Oh, I just came to play the guitar for her. And he said, Well, you're sitting there. You may as well. So then I sang Breakfast at Tiffany's by Deep Blue Something. And then I did the rest of the audition process. And 10 days later, we both got a letter, and she didn't get the job, and I did. And so I left
Wow.
college early and I went off to start the job. And it was kind of a wild decision. But I also thought, I'm at college to learn how to get a job as a performer, but I got a job as a performer. So I guess I just go. I've always believed that people who have a backup plan never really make it. If you've got a backup plan, you've already accepted the fact that you're not going to get there. You probably won't. So I never had a backup plan. I just always chased the thing directly. And I went off to Haven and I learned so much. I worked with Dave Burns, who was in an act called Atmosphere at the time, doing illusions. I saw Martin James a lot, John Danbury a lot. I became real good friends to this day with Paul DeBeck. Paul DeBeck was touring, doing stage magic shows. He was a year younger than me. I was 18 by the point I started, and he was 17. But he was
Wow.
touring with a magic act. But of course, he'd won, IBM competitions, Magic Circle competitions. He was fantastic, and I saw him 2 weeks ago at his place in Las Vegas. So it's working out pretty good for him too. But I became friends with him, and I met a bunch of magicians early doors, but I was friends with all of those magicians for a year almost before I started buying and doing magic myself. even then, watching magicians, it never occurred to me, oh, I could buy tricks and be a magician too, until I was in a magic shop. And then it happened. And then I
Yeah.
thought, oh, there's probably a reason that I've been so drawn to these magicians and I've enjoyed watching magic acts. And out of all the acts that visited, it was the magicians I, had long-lasting friendships with. So I guess it was always waiting for me to open the door. I just didn't see it for a long time. I just had performing as my focus, and magic came later. But I think, as you said, that having all that performing experience, at the point that I started doing magic, I'd been on stages for almost 8 years. I think that it probably helps because a lot of people find out who they are through magic. I knew who I was already, and then I added magic on top. So I guess that probably cut out a lot of the learning that I might have done otherwise.
Definitely. That's fascinating. The other thing that kind of occurred to me from listening to that is it's probably a little bit different to the way that a lot of people get started because most people, especially these days, when they come into magic, it's all about close up. Whilst you were talking about buying magic and putting it on stage and putting it on stage, and because you had that sort of platform to go out and perform to lots of different people constantly, you're probably gravitating towards stage magic. But I know that
Yeah.
you've done close up. I mean, I know that maybe not so much now. I know that now, but I know that like you've done close up an awful lot. Like, were you interested in close up? You were buying all of this magic. Was it the focus on stage magic? Did you have any interest in sitting there and spending every waking hour learning how to palm a coin and reading Bobos, or was it kind of more like where were you with all that sort of thing?
I've always had a complicated relationship with close-up magic. I never was interested in it as an idea when I got into magic. I wanted to be a stage performer. I started learning it out of necessity because you got to work, right? And when, that's where all the gigs are. The gigs are in close-up magic. And it's funny that my kind of introduction to magicians was through close-up magic. But even that was kind of by accident. I was performing close-up magic all the time in JB Magic, of course. And the biggest percentage of performers in Magic do close up Magic because it's a unifying factor. I think the close up sits in the middle of all kid shows performers do close up Magic as well. All stage performers do some close up Magic as well. Everyone in every form of Magic also does some close up Magic. It's the centerpiece of the
Yeah,
Magic industry. And I guess that's for a lot of reasons. It's easier to practice. You can show close-up magic to one person, whereas stage effects, you need at least two or three, ideally. Um, Close-up magic is kind of easy to carry with you and easy to, accessible. So its popularity is not lost on me. It's obvious why it's popular, but it never really was of interest to me other than in a functional sense. I was doing close-up magic in JB Magic. I was demonstrating close-up magic and showing it to people all the time. And I was good at selling close-up magic in the shop. And then kind of a weird thing happened. The Blackpool Magic Convention rolled around, and Wayne Dobson used to call JB Magic all the time for a chat. Now, not having been a Magic fan as a kid, I didn't know about Wayne Dobson. I never saw him when I was a kid. I'd heard of Paul Daniels, but I didn't know Wayne. And one day, Wayne called the shop. And of course, Wayne, who sadly is no longer with us, he and I became really dear friends and very, very close for a point. But at that time, Wayne was quite different to how people remember him towards the end. His voice was very strong. He had a lot more movement than he had towards the end, and he was quite a different person when I first met him. And so he would call the shop, and I would talk to him for an hour, half an hour, whatever it may be. And then he would go off the phone, and I would say, "Oh, I've just been talking to this guy called Wayne Dobson. He was really funny, and he knows a lot about magic." And then, Paul Roberts, who worked in the shop, or Mark Mason would say, "Well, yeah, obviously it's Wayne Dobson." And I would say, "What does that mean?" And then they would say, "Well, look at this." And they would put YouTube on, which was new at the time, by the way, in the shop. And I would watch Wayne Dobson clips on YouTube and just think, oh my God, I can't believe this is the guy I just spoke to. And I think Wayne and I became friends because I didn't have any automatic reverence to him. I just thought he was another customer when I first spoke to him, which now seems insane. I didn't know I was talking to a legend, but I soon learned and I changed my attitude. Like, oh my God, whenever he would call, I would be nervous. So Wayne and I became pretty fast friends. And then the Magic Convention rolled around, and Mark Mason said, "Nobody wants to watch you. do magic on my stand, so which is, Mark's usual blunt honesty. So you're going to work for Wayne Dobson at the convention instead. And I said, okay, great, that sounds amazing. So I worked for Wayne. I demonstrated all of his tricks. And as luck would have it, I was on a stand next door to Russ Stevens. Wayne and Russ were always next to each other for years. And Russ saw me demonstrating Wayne's tricks and doing some of my own stuff. And he just said to me, do you have enough of your own stuff to put out a DVD? And at that point, Russ didn't have tons of DVDs out. He had Martin Sanderson's kind of groundbreaking DVDs, Corporate Close Up. A few other people were out at that time. Sean McCree had a DVD out.
Yeah,
But
mix and mingle.
Mix and Mingle, yeah, this kind of stable of magicians that Russ had out was quite small, maybe 5 to 10 DVDs maximum. And so he asked me if I wanted to do my own DVD, and I said yes. And in October 2008, we filmed Supercharged Classics. It came out in June 2009, and suddenly everybody knew me as a close-up magician. But I honestly had no interest in it at all. I would lecture on it, I would show people it, but it wasn't where I wanted to be at all. And for years, it took a long time to kind of rewrite people's perception of me to being a stage magician. But also, I didn't really warrant any reputation as a stage magician because I still wasn't very good. That came years and years later. The first time I got booked to perform on stage at a magic convention was the IBM in 2011. I did Vanishing Bottle and Snowstorm, and what I would now consider. I just would never do those things now as a magician performing at a magic convention. To go out and do Vanishing Bottle and Snowstorm, it's just seems bizarre to me, but that's what I had, and I was kind of funny, I guess. So yeah, that's my relationship with close up. I guess is odd. The one thing I had going for me is that I started doing close up magic in a Chiquito. My friend John Harding, he wasn't my friend at the time. He became my friend through this contract. Paul Roberts, who worked in JV Magic with me, was doing restaurants for John Harding, Chiquito. He asked me if I wanted to do one because one of the magicians had left. So I started doing that restaurant. And then the manager of my restaurant asked me if I could do a second day a week. I was doing Sunday, and he really liked me and asked if I could do Tuesday nights too. So I said yes. And then John noticed, like, oh, this guy's picked up an extra gig by himself. I paid John the commission and everything, but I suddenly had 2 gigs. So John was thrilled. So when another magician left their residency, John offered it to me. So before I knew it, I was doing 3 hours in a Chiquito on a Tuesday night. Then I was doing one from till 4 on a Sunday, and then 5 until 8 at another one. So suddenly I was doing close up magic 9 hours a week. And it was at the end of doing that for 16 months that I worked at the magic convention, and Russ said, do you want to do a DVD? So for all I wasn't necessarily into it as an idea, I was doing close up magic 8 hours a day in JB Magic and then 9 hours a week in a Chiquita restaurant. So even if you don't like something, you're going to be all right at it. I
Gonna
had
get good
some,
at it, yeah.
yeah, I had some chops, and I put those DVDs out, and then I was a kind of maybe slightly known close-up magician, but I always wanted to do stage shows, and as soon as I got enough stage shows to stop doing close-up magic, I did, and I can say I probably have done 2 close-up magic shows in the last 5 years, maybe.
Wow.
What? Yeah, maybe, and probably only 3 or 4 in the last 10 years. I just have totally, totally dropped it. Every now and again, if someone says, "Do you want to do this job?" I'll say, "No, you're all right, thanks." And then they'll say, "You sure it's good money?" And I'll say, "No, I'm really okay." And then they'll tell me the money, and I'll say, "What time do you want me there?" So,
That's funny. I,
so
I,
if it's
I
really
want to
good, I'll
talk.
do it.
I want to talk about some of that, but let me just reverse quickly, just to finish the story. You kind
Mhm.
of jumped from working at Haven to going to JB Magic. How did you go from the one to the other? Like, so you're in Haven, you're
Yeah,
performing in the season, you've become a competent stage magician because you're just performing all of the time.
yeah.
It's the end of the season at Haven. You have options. You could kick do a pantomime until the next season comes around, like a lot of the guys do. You can you could do something else completely. But how did you get from that to working at the magic shop that you went to that got you excited about magic in the first place?
Craig, there are times when I look at life And I think about that movie, Sliding Doors, with Gwyneth Paltrow, where the door either closes or it doesn't. And two completely different lives spring out. And I'm glad you've asked me that because I did skip over it because you'd forget. But sometimes when I'm walking, maybe I'm walking down Hollywood Boulevard in LA and I'm at the Magic Castle that week, or I'm laughing until Pepsi comes out of my nose with a friend in Chicago or something like that. And I think back to how many fortunate things have to happen to put you in that situation. And it's that gap between Haven and working at JB Magic that is the most fortunate, I think, because when I was performing at Haven, every single night I would do this game show thing at 8 p.m. It was Rory and Bradley's Fun Time. They were the two main characters. And the basic format of that show was go out on stage, do the Bradley Bear dance or the Rory the Tiger dance, introduce Bradley or Rory, do some banter with them. They obviously can't talk. And what is funny is that they went through a season where they decided they could talk. And it was the first time they'd ever done this. And you would put a CD on, and the characters would interact with the performer, but the performer had to have learned exactly what to say. And I never could learn the words. So I would say to Rory the Tiger, Rory, I think we should play some musical instruments today. And Rory would go, That's right, we should go to the beach. And I would stand there looking like an absolute moron because I just didn't know the script. So, but we would do that, and then the characters would go, and then the presenter would have 15 minutes to do anything they wanted. So you could get four kids on stage and have them all do one smart fella, he felt smart, or some stupid game like that. Or you could do party dances or anything you wanted. And I, of course, chose to do magic. So I would do different bits that I bought, and that was my 15 minutes every night. And there was a touring company called Explosive Productions, and they put on these incredible shows. First touring company I ever saw that had those the Mac 10 lights that can shine any pattern on the ceiling and they swirl around and they
Yeah.
make the room look amazing. They had those, they had their own sound system, and they set up their own sound booth at the back of the dance floor so that the production was incredible. But what it also meant was that the boss of the company was sitting at the back of the dance floor in their own production booth every single week that they came while I presented. So every single week he saw me presenting, saw me doing different material all the time. And they got a contract for a place called Ribby Hall, where I know you've been because you came and bought illusions from me there once. You remember this is
Yeah,
a lot
yeah,
of
I
years
remember
ago.
that. Yeah.
They got the contract for there, and they were putting entertainment in, and they basically said to me, do you feel like you could step up to the position of being entertainment manager? You'll only have a team of one or two people plus you. It's a small place, but it'll be a winter job, and if you want to come back to Haven at the end you can, or if you want to stick with us you can. And I said 100% I'll do that. So I moved to Ribby Hall. Now, I had the option once I'd moved to Ruby Hall, because they didn't do daytime entertainment, of living near my job and having to get the train every day to go to Blackpool to walk into the magic shop, or living in Blackpool and having to get the train every night to my work. And because I'm stupid, I chose to live in Blackpool and go to the magic shop every single day and then have to get the train to my job every single night. And so that's what I did. Every night I would go to work and do performing all night. Then I would go home and live in Blackpool. And so that just meant every day I got up, I went to the magic shop, and I drove Mark Mason insane. I would be in the magic shop from 10 a.m. till 4 p.m. almost every single day. And one day I was in there doing exactly that thing. And by this point, Mark had grown maybe not affectionately towards me, but certainly tolerant of me. And he'd started to show me some stuff, some tricky moves and things like that. And Mark kind of Mark says now that he always knew I had something in me that meant I would make something out of this business. But I just remember him telling me that I was a moron. And if I ever performed at the Magic Castle, he would quit magic. And if I ever got out of Blackpool, it would be the last thing that ever, it's just, he always kind of, maybe he motivated me through giving me stick, but that's kind of what it was like. And one day he was in the back, and of course, JB Magic made and continue to make their own products, which is a process I was part of when I worked there. Mark was in the back, and he was in the middle of gluing some stuff, and some customers walked in. And I was in the back room where you'll remember the kids' props and the stage props used to
Yep.
be. So I always wanted to stand in there and look at all that stuff. And I remember I would stand and stare at dissecto arm choppers and have all of these dreams of being, an illusionist with all these big props and being a stage performer. I just love to be surrounded by it. And I'm still like that now. I love to be surrounded by books, and my house is full of stuff we've collected from all over the place. I just like to be immersed in that thing. So I would always stand in that back room, and Mark would be in the office talking to me, but making stuff. And he said to me, "Do you mind just popping behind the counter and helping those people out?" And I said to him, "Why? I don't work here. I don't know what to do." Mark said, "You spend more time in here than most of the staff. You'll be fine." So I went behind the counter and I showed them some tricks. And of course, because I didn't work there, but I loved magic, I had so much enthusiasm for the products. Like JB Magic had loads of really cool stuff. I think people don't really give JB and Mark Mason credit for how good so many of the products really were and how groundbreaking and intricate so many of the gimmicks were and how they were made. And what's funny is a lot of those products had two people's names on, so and so and Mark Mason. The truth of it is, people would turn up to JB with a product that was a half baked idea, and Mark would turn it into a blockbuster, amazing thing that was way beyond what they'd ever thought of. And a lot of people got credit for putting tricks out, but a lot of it was Mark's work based on their original idea. And so I showed these people everything that I'd ever bought and learned, and they wanted nearly all of it. So when it was time to ring up the till, the cash register for our American friends, um, Mark came behind the counter and he said, "Okay, what out of this are you actually taking?" And they said, "Well, everything." So Mark put it through, and it was like £700 worth of stuff that I sold on my first day, not even as a staff member standing behind the counter. And Mark said to me, "Do you want to come back tomorrow?" And I said, "Well, I am coming back tomorrow. I always come back every day." And he went, "No, come back tomorrow and stand on this side of the counter." And I said, "Okay, that sounds great." And I started working at JB Magic that day, just out of nowhere. So I would work at
Wow.
JV Magic all day. Then I would go to my other gig at night. And eventually, Mark moved to America, and Paul Roberts was the manager of the shop, and there was just the two of us in there. And there was always a flat above the shop. And I was having a difficult time with my flat elsewhere in Blackpool. So Mark said, "Do you want to live in the flat above the shop instead? And we'll just take the rent out of your wages." And I said, "That sounds great." So I moved above the shop. So for a time, and I had the keys to the shop too, there was an internal door. So I would literally, the shop would close. I would go upstairs, have dinner. Then I would come back down into the shop and I would sit and read all of the books all night. I would, play with all the different tricks. And I would just spend all night in the shop on days that I wasn't at my other job. And then eventually I realized that my other job, even though I was performing, was holding me back from being able to get private gigs. So with the security of the magic shop, I left working at the holiday park and I just lived in JB Magic and worked there all day. But Blackpool, of all the places in the world, and this is again that sliding doors moment, has about 4 billion hotels that are willing to pay any performer who will do it 70, 80, 90 pound a night for a magic show. And so I started doing those. So in the early days, I would get £80 a night for a magic show, but sometimes I would do three of those in the same night. So often I was doing 15, 20 shows a week in Blackpool hotels in the height of summer and working at the magic shop all day. The exact same thing that happened to me as a close up magician happened to me as a stage performer. And I was doing so many stage shows every single night. I remember I used to do a card in orange, and I would literally leave JB Magic, walk up the street to the Tesco, buy a bag of oranges, go back to the flat, kick the pip off the orange, roll up one up, stuff it in there, glue the pip back on. And I would have a duffel bag, sometimes with three or four of those in it every night to set out to work, all with the seven of hearts in. And just so I didn't have to reset in between shows. So I was doing so many shows. And the crazy part was I couldn't drive at the time. And I got a driving instructor who, as it turned out, loved magic. So sometimes I would take a driving lesson and I would do the first 10 minutes to a show. He would come in and watch the show. Then I would do the second 30 minutes in between two shows. He would watch that show, and I would do the last 10 minutes driving back to my flat. And then, so my driving instructor was getting paid to give me an hour driving lesson, but he was watching two magic shows a night, which sounds ridiculous, but it's absolutely that's how it went down. It's so bizarre. Um,
That is
and by
brilliant.
by the end of all that, I was doing so many shows in hotels and then started to get the occasional Haven Holiday Park and stuff like that. The JB Magic closed, but I still lived in the flat above it for a year, even though it wasn't a business anymore. And then eventually I met my wife and I, she wasn't my wife at the time, Sarah, she was my girlfriend then. She got a job in Preston, so we both moved to Preston together, and shows just continued, and they got bigger and better. And I started doing Haven. I started doing flyouts to Thompson resorts in Egypt and Turkey and all those places. And then I started to get cruise ships coming in. And then I was doing more and more lecturing for magicians and performing stage magic. And then that takes us from 2009, when Supercharge came out, to 2016. And 2016 is when, in a single week and a half period, I lectured at the Blackpool Magic Convention, did my first Penguin Live, and performed at the Magic Castle for the first time in 10 days.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow. Talk about like wow. I mean, that's so successful. That's insane.
that
I,
was the watershed. That was 10 years ago now, but that was kind of that was the moment that really changed everything. But I literally, like, I flew, I flew to Penguin, and I did Penguin Tuesday, Wednesday. You might remember the Penguin Lives used to be live. You actually did them all in
mm.
the same night. And it was, there was a little audience there, and you did it all in one go. And people could watch it as it was happening, and then it was available afterwards. So I did that, and I recorded on Wednesday live. I flew home on Thursday. I did Blackpool Magic Convention Friday and Saturday. And then on Sunday, I flew back to LA with my wife and did the Magic Castle for a week. Crazy.
Wow. That's mad. That's insane. I
Yeah.
I want to talk about all of that, but let me ask you one question actually. Uh, Reversing a little bit to when you were working with JB Magic, you talked about how Russ Stevens was like, "Hey, do you want to bring out a DVD?"
Yeah.
Did you have any interest in being a creator of magic up until that point? Because you are, and you've released a lot of magic to magicians, and you lecture, and you've done, like you say, lot of Penguin Lives, you've done a lot. Was that the catalyst? Was that, or did you always have a burning desire to create your own magic? I know you. It's kind of a weird question because I know you create your own stuff for your show, but that's
Yeah.
you. Like, did you ever have a burning desire to create for magicians, or was that the
No.
moment where it made you think, you know what, this is something that maybe
Well,
I can do?
well, I never have done that. If you look at my material that I've released for magicians, there isn't anything ever that isn't just from my show. I've never, ever, ever sat down to create a trick that had magicians in mind. It's just not
I
been my
remember
way.
a really cool trick that you released, and maybe I'm getting this wrong because I'm going back into my very dusty memory banks. But I'm sure you brought out a really cool concept of an Omni deck that had Go
Yeah,
maybe or something like that.
that's right.
That had lots of different sections to it. Like,
That
is
that was kind of
that was that something you were performing and you released after you started performing? Because that's more of a close-up trick, right?
Yeah, but it was only ever in my show. So I was doing Omnideck because everybody was, because Martin Sanderson put it on corporate close up, and everyone suddenly started doing card to envelope and Omnideck, and
Hmm.
it's still a great set. I was doing that, and there was a guy called Mike who used to come into JB Magic a lot. And I've never ever told anybody how this happened actually, but he used to come in JB Magic a lot, and he literally worked up the road. He had a sign printing business. His name wasn't Mike. I'm sorry, it was John, because I just remembered he's in my phone as John Signs. And he owned a sign printing business that did, just giant banners and metal signs and stuff that went above businesses and all of that. But he used to like magic, and he came in JB Magic a lot. And I demonstrated Omnideck for him, and he said, I can make those. And I went, what do you mean? And he went, well, we, cut acrylic and we make acrylic stuff. And he said, I can make those exactly like that. And I said, all right, that's interesting. And then it was just kind of one of those things where, as a demonstrator, when someone you actually feel like what they're saying is, well, I'm not buying that. I can make it myself. Sometimes it's a frustrating situation to be in as a magic demonstrator, because you think like, oh, well, fair enough. But then a few weeks went by and I was thinking about the fact that he'd said it more. And I knew he was going to come in. So when he came in, I said to him, when you make these, can you engrave them and stuff as well? And he said, yeah, of course. And I thought, oh, that would be a great giveaway. That became pretty prevalent later, but I'd never seen it at this point. So I got a couple made and I got them engraved like a business card with my information on. So I did them for the top table, or, if I was doing a big company, or I did Magic at Blackpool Football Club once, close at Magic, but it was for the team and the manager and the CEO and all of those people were there. So the director of football, I did it for him and I gave him one of the engraved ones. And then I remember the guy saying to me, oh, our acrylic that we've got is shifted. If I make you any more, they might not be the same depth or height. And I said, what's the smallest you could make? And he told me. And I said, how many of those would it take to add up to a regular deck? And he said, five. And I said, could you make me one of those? And he did. And then I held it in my hand. And as soon as I held it and realized it felt more like a deck, but also that it had exactly the same properties of the Omni deck, except for the fact it wasn't made to look like a deck around the outside. And it always frustrated me when I would do Omni deck that every now and again, somebody would be like, whoa, oh yeah, it looks like a deck around the outside. And they would feel like I've always subscribed to that thing that if people think they know how it works, they know how it works. It doesn't matter if they're right. If they think they know, that's enough for them. And so they're right, even if they guess the wrong method, they've guessed right for them. So I hated it when people would say, oh, it looks like a deck around the outside. So I really liked that I could have one that didn't. And so it all kind of sprung out of that. And I said to him, can you make me those? And he said, yes. This is a mad story, by the way, when I get to it. And so he made me a couple. And I said, how long would it take you to make me a couple of hundred of these? And he told me. And I was like, okay, let's do that. Because I called Michael Murray and Graham Shaw at Magic Box and said, I've got this thing. Mark Mason doesn't want to put it out. Do you want to put it out? And they said yes. And so I said, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll sell you the first 150 and you can have exclusive rights to it at Blackpool. And then after that, you'll have had 2 months to sell your 150. I'll sell it to everyone if you fund the first 150. So they gave me the costs for the first 150 and I gave them um the deal with Murphy's, obviously, it's
Yeah.
the 40%,
Yeah.
60% thing. So I gave it to them at 60% and I got them made. And then they had the first 150 and I made a small profit. But then I was going to do a cruise ship and this guy, Patrick Walford, you ever meet Patrick at Murphy's?
Yes. Yes. Yeah, I know Patrick quite well.
I don't, is he still there?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay. So
Currently,
Patrick,
he's currently involved in their apprentice line, all of the sort of the simpler magic that I think
okay.
he's involved in all that.
I was going to a ship in Brazil, um, and the phone rang. It was an American number that I didn't recognize. So I answered the phone, and the next voice says, hi, this is Patrick Walford. I'm from Murphy's Magic. We've heard about your trick, Go, the clear Omni deck. We'd like to release it. And I said, okay. They'd obviously seen it on social media. I said, Magic Box have got it, and they've still got 5 weeks exclusive on it, but I'd be happy to sell it to you after that. And he said, but I said, this was like a long time ago. I said, I don't have the money to get it made. So how can we work out the deal? And he said, tell us how much it'll retail for. I told them. They said, okay, if we buy 600 of them, you'll get this much. And it was, I don't remember, it was like, it was more money than I'd ever, it was $12,000 or something like that. It was more money than I'd ever dreamt of in my wildest dreams. It was like a year's wages, working in a magic shop in the early 2000s. So he told me the amount of money and I calmly said, yes, I think that will be fine. But internally, I was like doing backflips, couldn't believe it. And he said, send us an invoice and put on all of these details and yada yada yada. And there was a guy working at Murphy's at the time called Solomon. I don't know if he's still working there. He said, email it to Solomon and we'll take care of it. So I got on the email in the airport on the way to Brazil. I sent all the invoice and all that stuff. Phew, off it went. I landed in Brazil and I checked my bank just for a laugh. And when I checked the bank, they paid me. The money was there. I'd taken like an 11, 12 hour flight. And when I landed, I had the money. And I just was like, I can't believe this is real. Oh my God, I've come up with a trick and I've sold it and they've sent me the money. So then my friend Darren Robinson, who I know you know as well, who owns Warp
Yep.
Magic, I called him and I said, Darren, I'm going to send you a few £1,000. And he went, that's nice of you. And I said, what I need you to do is take it to John at the sign place and tell him we need 700, because I wanted 100 for me. We need 700 of these things making. And then once he's made them, I need you to drive them to my house so that Sarah can pack them. And then we're going to ship them to Murphy's. And so Darren went and got them, took them to my house. Sarah packaged them all up, printed the instructions, put them in the boxes, the whole thing. She shipped them to Murphy's. And by the time I got home from the cruise 9 days later, the whole thing was done. And I never touched a single one of them.
That's hilarious.
Yeah,
It's a
it was
great
the
thing. It's just
best,
that you should bring it back out, to be perfectly honest. It's great.
best deal ever.
It's a really great trick. It's a really, really great trick.
Thank
It's,
you. Well, if anyone wants to buy the rights to it, Dave Bonsall always loved it too. You know, he always sold them at lectures, and he did it at lectures and stuff too. And people always liked it. And I remember joking in the trailer or something about, this is a great way to learn cardistry. These are like cardistry trainers. And then Dan and Dave, they put those out as a real
yeah,
thing
they did, didn't they? Yeah.
about a year later, and I'm convinced they got the idea from Go. But not that I mind. But yeah, it was a strange one. It's probably the only thing that I've ever put out that was a real trick, because I've never released anything that came with a prop apart from that. Every other one of my releases has been a Penguin Live, an Alakazam lecture, a Vanishing Ink masterclass. Now I'm putting out my own downloads, but they've all been things that have just genuinely been in my act. I never create anything with other magicians in mind. I only come up with stuff with me using it. And then I use it for a few years. And then inevitably, I turn up and do magic conventions and I perform that material, or I get booked for a lecture and I lecture that material, because I just don't have the space in my head to maintain a magic lecture of material that I'm not actively doing. So typically, if you book me for your club, I turn up and I do my real act and then I explain it to you, because I also don't really think that it matters. I don't think anybody else can be me. Like, the
Yeah.
secret source of my act is not the 8 cards to pocket, or my vanishing elephant, or the chop cup, or any of that stuff. The material's good, but it's still not me if someone else does it. So I've never worried about that as a thing either. So typically, if I ever do lectures or magic conventions or anything, what you see is the current evolution of my act. Basically, I've always just done it that way. So I'm not really a creator as much as I'm someone who takes things that I've thought of for myself and then just shows them to other people.
Well, I was going to ask a different question, but that actually brings something to mind. Do you have any advice on trick selection? Because I've seen all of your Penguin Lives, I've seen all of your Alakazam, I've seen them all, or a lot of them. And one thing that I see that you do is you tend to gravitate towards the classics,
Yeah,
but you put your own spin on it. And I'm pretty sure on social media a few years ago, I remember you advocating for the performance of Vanishing Bandana. I'm pretty sure maybe I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure I remember you saying, writing a blog or something about we should love the vanishing bandana. I might be wrong again, dusty old memory, but I'd love to talk
yeah.
about that. And because I don't see, I'd love to talk about that. And also, more importantly, your approach when it comes to actually creating material for your show and any advice you can give people for how to actually stamp your own unique personality onto it. Because you are right. That's what you've done. I see a lot of your material, and it's like, oh well, everyone else does a chop cup, but when I see you doing a chop cup, it's very different to anyone else, and it's not just a chop cup. I've seen you do multiplying bottles. I've seen you do multiplying balls. I've seen you, the yarn. There's so many different things that I've seen you do, and they're
Yeah.
very, very unique to you.
My friend Taylor Hughes very kindly always says of me that I always find a trick and then I work out how to do the best version of that trick. And then that's just, I never invent stuff, but I just take things that I really like and then I work them for just from every angle: music, staging, try to incorporate extra elements into them, just make them the best version of that thing that I can. Um, on the Vanishing Bandana thing, there's a funny thing that happened there, because I used to be quite active on various, magic messaging boards. And I think Magic Bunny was the one at the time that everybody was on, or maybe it was the Magic Cafe. I don't remember which one it was, but as a kind of thought experiment, because I've always liked to write blogs and things like that. As a kind of thought experiment, I wrote two blogs simultaneously, and it was the easiest way to do it because every time I thought of a point, I I kind of was interested. My friend, oh God, I'm getting a bit lost in the kind of history of how this came about because I've forgotten about it. My friend John Harding once said to me that you can never ever take action based on something I've said. That was his point. He said, because you're such a good arguer that you can argue both sides of the same point and be completely believable. He said, you're a real proselytizer. And even if you've only just thought of something 2 minutes ago, you can argue your opinion as if it's a fact. And he said, that's a really good quality to have, but it's a really dangerous person to be friends with. Because he said sometimes you say stuff as if you've thought about it for a year because it comes out that way, but actually you thought of it a minute ago. And so he and I were having a conversation about the Vanishing Bandana, and he said you should put together your opinion on both sides of that thing. So I wrote two blogs simultaneously, and one of them was called, based on the Peter Sellers movie. It was called "Why I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Vanishing Bandana." That was the name of the thing, and I'd written another blog which was identical but had a different title, but it was exactly the opposite point. And the first one was about why the Vanishing Bandana is brilliant, why audiences like it, why in our shows we shouldn't really worry about the originality that magicians crave if what you're trying to do is work for normal audiences in regular places and you're not trying to create some reputation for yourself. You can be a very, very successful performer if you can do really good versions of, marketed tricks. But then I wrote the exact opposite think piece about why we should never perform the Vanishing Bandana and why it should be ditched and consigned to hell and all of that sort of stuff. And that's probably the one that I believe in the most, because if you want to have any kind of success as a performer, one thing I can tell you right now is that I work on a lot of cruise ships. And the very first thing that a cruise director will do on a cruise ship is tell the office, if you're doing Vanishing Bandana, Snowstorm, loads of kind of those classic Professor's Nightmare, stuff like that, that they just consider all magicians do. If you're doing those tricks, it doesn't reflect very well on their willingness to continue booking you. So I probably believe in that point quite a bit more. But when I posted that first one, it blew up so much and was so kind of inflammatory that I quite enjoyed the reaction to it. And, as someone who, speaking to you, as someone who occasionally has caused controversy within the magic community, I'm sure, I'm sure you recognize that all publicity is publicity, like it's that thing, isn't it, where if people are talking about you, it's rarely a bad thing. So I waited quite a long time before I posted the counterpoint to it, and then when I did, it just didn't really get anywhere near the same kind of talk or publicity or comments or likes or anything. So the other one lived on, is what I'd said. But yeah, that was a strange one. I really was just trying to argue both sides of the coin. And I chose the Vanishing Bandana because it seemed like the most obvious kicking post, really. I probably could have written that about any trick that everybody was doing at the time.
Yeah.
Um, but in terms of classics, I do gravitate towards classics, but I'm very nostalgic by kind of nature. I really love to look back on things that have happened and talk about old stories and memories. And when I was saying that my house is full of stuff we've collected, quite literally from where I'm sitting right now, my refrigerator is absolutely covered in fridge magnets from every place I've ever been. I have a shelf full of those little espresso cups that they sell at Starbucks, for every different place around the world. I've got them for every California, Miami, India, you name it. If I've been there, I've got a Starbucks espresso cup with it. The stairs of our house are covered in pictures from all the different things that have happened in our lives. I just love to surround myself in nostalgia. So it's
Mm.
unsurprising, I guess, that I would gravitate towards classic tricks because when I look through magic books and I see diagrams of performers, like my favorite book is Benson by Starlight. And there's a picture in
Right.
there of Roy Benson lying on his side talking into a microphone. It's my favorite picture in all of magic. Whenever I see a diagram of kind of a performer, kind of the way they're holding a card in this hand and their other hand is up here and they've got an expression or something. I try to find ways in my own show to kind of find myself in those positions too. And I feel like I'm almost touching those magicians through history, that thing of them striking that exact pose 80 years ago and me doing it now. I feel like I'm very directly connecting with the history of magic. And I'm obsessed with history and the history of magic. And actually, I'm sitting in front of a bookcase now, and you can only mainly see magic books, but the whole wall is books about different things. And I think that people always used to say that the most creative magicians are the ones who read magic books. I don't think it's got anything to do with magic books. I think that it's the people who read magic books read other books as well. And so reading, I think, makes you more creative. So I love to look through books and look at those old pictures, and I love to kind of just bury myself in nostalgia. So that I think is why I gravitate towards more classic tricks. Because even when I do more like newer effects, if someone brings something out and I think it's cool, the most recent one is that calculator trick, where everyone predicts the time and date is on their phone,
Yeah,
which is
yeah,
a
yeah.
new effect.
Toxic Plus. Yeah.
Toxic Plus, yeah, but when I do it, I get all of the lights turned out in the theater, and I have everybody who takes out their phone turn on the flashlight on their phone. And so it looks like an old, music concert in a lot of ways. And I like to light things or stage things in a way that feels nostalgic, even if the trick is new. So I don't know if I answered your question there because
Oh,
I've
you
gone into
did.
a
You definitely
bit of a
did. No, that
ramble.
was
But I don't necessarily gravitate towards classic tricks. I just gravitate towards nostalgic aesthetic, and that those two things come hand in hand, I think.
that's fantastic. And really good advice, Mark. I want to ask you another thing. You talked about working at JB Magic, and then fast forward a few years, only a few years to 2016. You're literally doing the castle, you're doing Blackpool, and so Penguin Live. I mean, that's in 10-day period. And I know you talked earlier on about, oh my God, when you hear somebody else saying it, you don't realize you've done so much. But let's call a spade a spade. Most magicians at the end of their career would wish they had the career that you had right now. If you could say, I regularly perform internationally. I perform on stages all over the world. I've done this, I've done this, I've done this. There's some magicians that make a good living their entire life and they will never even come close to that level of success. What would you say was the process or the biggest point that you went through going from JB Magic? Because you talked about I'm working in a shop, I'm making not great money, and I'm going out doing gigs and I'm performing an awful lot, and I'm making money, but it's not the greatest money. To like being where you are now, where you're so in demand. Like, do you feel like the shop shutting down helped? Was that holding you back in a way, or was it something else? Is there something that you can say? And I suppose the other question is, was this a were you sitting there in JB Magic up in your flat above JB going, you know what? In 6 or 7 years' time, I want to be headlining Blackpool Magic Convention. I want to be at the Magic Castle. Or, was this a goal that you were like, right, okay, I want to get there. How am I going to get there? Or was it more of a case of happy, like, opportunity?
When we spoke today for the first time, when you called me up, tell everyone what that conversation was. What happened when you called me on the phone?
Well, you spent a long time getting your camera sorted.
Yeah. No, I mean, like a few hours ago when you called me up and you said, "Hey, Mark, it's Craig. Tell me how the conversation went down."
Well, I said I wanted to do an interview with you.
Mhm.
I apologize that I hadn't been with you for a few days because I've been busy. Um, I'm trying to remember. I'm trying
Crucially,
to
when were
remember.
we supposed to do this interview?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, we were supposed to do it later on this afternoon. Yes, we were
Yeah.
supposed to do it later. And I came off my thing that I needed to do early, and I rang you up and I was like, "Is there an, I'm free now if you want to do it now." And you were
What
like,
did I say?
you said, "I need to set things up. I need to get ready. Give me a few minutes and I'll let you know when I'm ready." But yeah, I can do it.
There you go. That's the whole answer to everything. I just said yes. I always just say yes. Whatever happens, I just say yes. I don't ever let anything get in the way of a thing happening. And that's, I think, a lot of people's biggest problem. We'd had this planned. It was supposed to be in the afternoon. I had loads of other things that I was going to do before I did that. I was going to set my office up. I was going to make it all right. I'm packing for a cruise ship in a week. I've got all of those other things. But nothing matters other than getting the thing done. The order that it happens doesn't matter. None of those things matter. All that matters is making the thing happen, yes or no. So you called me up and said, I can do this right now if you want to. And I said, I need to set up, but give me a minute and I'll be there. I literally hung up the phone from you. I turned into a Tasmanian devil. I threw a chair in front of a bookcase. I got a camera out. I put the MacBook on an ironing board, which is where it's sitting now. I jumped in the shower. I put a normal t-shirt on. I did my hair. I got some glasses that I thought would be slightly more interesting on camera than the ones I was wearing, which by the way, I got these in Vegas last week. They're
They look
sunglasses
good.
from the Coca-Cola shop. And I always just buy glasses from the beach or anywhere. And then I take them to an optician and I get my prescription put in because any optician will put your prescription in a pair of glasses for you for less than £50, no matter what your prescription is. The prescription fee is under £50. So if you buy some sunglasses that you think are cool at the beach for £3.50, you can get them turned into glasses at the
Wow.
opticians, which is,
That's cool. I
if
didn't
ever you
know.
see me, and I always have different glasses on every time you see me, that's my secret. I just buy them anywhere. These were from the Coca-Cola merch store and I get them made into glasses. So I went and got some different glasses. I sat down and then I clicked on your Zoom link. And then while we were talking, I was still setting up the camera and
Yeah, you
everything
were.
and
Yeah.
getting it right
Wow.
because I never want to miss opportunity because you might then get busy. Or if I say, give me an hour, in an hour, you might say, I'm so sorry, something's just come up or whatever. And the thing might get delayed. And I always want to do the thing. So I always, always, always say yes. When I
So
was, working at JB Magic and Russ Stevens said, have you got enough stuff to do a DVD? I didn't even think about the question. I just said, yeah. Prior to that, I worked at Camelot Theme Park and they said, do you know how to eat fire? And I said, yeah. I did not know how to eat fire. But in the time between saying yes and the interview that was a week later, I learned. When I got asked if I wanted a lecture at a thing, have you got enough stuff for a lecture? Yes. Have you got enough stuff for this? Yes. Can you do this gig? Yes. Do you know how to juggle? Yes. Can you be at this place to do this thing at this? Yes. I just always, always, always say yes, no matter what it is. And sometimes I see people online, magicians, not people, um, talking about close-up gigs and stuff like that. When someone says, I've been offered this gig and I'm not sure I'm ready for it. What do you think I should do? And people always go, very high and mighty, aren't we, magicians? Well, you shouldn't do it because you'll let down magic. And what will happen is they'll book you and they won't think you're very good because you're not ready and they'll never hire another magician again. So what you should do is the valiant thing. You should pass that gig over to an experienced magician so that you single-handedly save the future of magic and you should wait until you're ready. Let me tell you, that's the worst. Just take the gig because the whole of magic is not on your back. The only person whose life and career you're responsible for is your own. So if you take a gig and you're not very good, and that means that another magician doesn't get booked by a client who might have booked one other magician in their life, so be it. I do not care about the career of anybody else except me. I will say yes. If someone rings me up today and says, do you know how to ride a unicycle down a high wire with your nipples on fire wearing a blindfold? I will say yes. I do it all the time. It used to be in my act. What time do you need me there? And as soon as I hang up the phone, I will learn how to do it. Or I'll call up a friend and I'll say, you know how to do this. Can you show me? Just say yes. That's the only secret to all of it. How did I get booked at the Magic Castle? I said yes. How did I get booked at Blackpool? I said yes. How did I put out DVDs when I'd only been a magician for 2.5 years? I said yes. How did I work at JB Magic? Because Mark Mason said, "Can you go behind the counter and show those people some magic?" And I went, "Yeah." I just said yes. That's the secret. Say yes.
That's
Worry about it later.
really amazing advice, and I completely agree with that because I'd rather be the person that looks back and goes, "At least I did it," than looking back and going, "If only I had." So I completely agree with that. I'm
What
going to
if you
ask you.
say no and then you think, "Oh, well, at least I didn't do that gig where I might not have been very good"? What if you would have been good? What if it would have been great and you'd have got an opportunity out of it? Say yeah.
I I agree with this 100%. I'm going to ask a question though, because I know that this question will come up on my channel. Devil's
Mhm.
advocate, what happens if there's an incredible opportunity, but there's risk attached to it?
What kind of
Example,
risk?
okay, case in point, I'll give you a ridiculous hypothetical. Uh, the MGM Grand has just got rid of David Copperfield.
Mhm.
Um,
That's
or
an interesting way to
sorry,
phrase that, Craig. I'm
sorry,
not sure
okay.
that I'm not sure it's entirely in line with the facts. It may or may
Okay,
not
no,
be.
David and MGM have gone separate ways. What would
Amicably
you do
parted
if you
ways.
had a what would you do if you had a phone call from the
This, by the
MGM
way,
saying
that, by the way, is why you're having so much legal trouble.
probably what would you do if MGM rang you up and said, you know what, we need a new magician. We want someone taking over from David Copperfield. We've seen you. You're the guy. However, to make it happen, you're going to have to pay X amount. And in order to pay that, you would have to put yourself into incredible debt, sell everything that you've got, but you can take that opportunity. But it will, that's what I mean. I mean, that's a ridiculous and hypothetical, but like a huge thing that you can get from it, but there's a massive risk attached to it as well.
Yes.
Fair enough.
Always, always, yes. Because when else is that going to come along? Like, I'm going to be at the MGM Grand. It's just a comedian from Liverpool called Bren Riley said an amazing thing to me once. He was doing flyouts for Thompsons, which I do as well, or I did back then. And they are very, very family centric. There's always families in the audience. He started getting booked for them, but he's a very, very blue comedian. And I said to him, well, I suppose he's got different levels, but the act that I knew of him was very adult centric. And I said to him, "Do you never worry about doing those gigs? What do you do on the gigs?" And he said, "My act." And I said, "What about the audience?" And he said, "If you book Elvis, you get rock and roll." And he didn't mean, I'm Elvis and I'm amazing. What he meant was, it's not the act's responsibility to be right for the gig. If the booker chooses you, that's their responsibility. If you book Elvis, you get rock and roll. If you book Metallica, you get rock music. If you book the Stone Roses, you get indie. That's what it is. So if you book David Copperfield, you get that sort of act. If you book Charlie Fry, it's not your responsibility. It's not Charlie Fry's responsibility to turn up and go, "Oh, this audience are not going to like vaudeville shtick. I should do a completely different thing." All you can ever do is turn up and do the thing that you know has worked for you the most amount of times previously. Second guessing yourself at the job is the worst thing you can ever do. Turning up and thinking, "Oh, this audience might not like what I normally do. So I know what I'll do. I'll make up a completely brand new persona on the spot in the hope that that works." Ridiculous. So all you can do is have what you have and do it in as many places as possible. So if the MGM call me up tomorrow and say, "We think you're the fit to replace David Copperfield," that would be a big phone call, by the way. But if they do, I'll say yes and I'll go and I'll do what I do. And if it completely ruins me, then that's fine, because it would ruin me emotionally, and, you know, just it would ruin everything about my life going forward to know that I got that phone call and I didn't go.
Yeah.
Because inevitably, what would happen is someone else would say yes. They would go and do it. They would have success. And I would always look at it and think, well, I could have done that, or I would have been better than that, or, I would have learned to be as good as that, or whatever it might be. I never ever would look at it and go, "Oh, they were right for it and I wasn't." I just think I should have gone. I should have said yes. I've never, ever, ever said no to anything, no matter how ill-suited I am or whatever. If I think it's a good opportunity for me, I'll take it. And I say no to a lot of stuff if I don't want to do it. I say no to a lot of close-up gigs. I say no to a lot of stand-up gigs that are too far away for not enough money or whatever it might be. But if I think there's an opportunity in anything, then I'll do it.
That's a great attitude to have. And you can see that's why you are as successful as you are. Yeah, 100%. That's
Well, it's not being better than anyone, though. It's just being in more places. It's being seen, isn't it? It's having more eyes on you. So it doesn't mean that you're necessarily very good. But there's loads of people who are dead successful that should not be where they're at. How many more influencers do we need to see rocket to fame and have a million, followers on social media and be making a fortune out of doing nothing? How many times have you written a really, really funny Facebook status or whatever, and it's had no likes, no views, no shares. And then you go on Facebook and you see someone's written a status that's been shared 40 million times, and it says, like, y'all be wild using ketchup and shit. And you're like, that status got 4 million shares. How did that happen? It's like the quality of stuff very rarely matters. The amount of eyes on it is what matters. So get as many eyes on yourself as you possibly can and let other people worry about whether they like it or not. Just do your thing and say yes all the time. And
that's
don't
really
worry if
good.
you're right for the gig. It's the booker's responsibility to make sure you're right for the gig. It's your responsibility to turn up and do what the booker knows you already do.
Yeah, that's amazing advice. Here's a question. With all of the things that you've done, and you literally travel the world performing, have you ever wanted to kind of go more into the TV side of things? Have you ever considered like going on America's Got Talent or Britain's Got Talent or pushing? Because with the attitude that you have, you could probably get really far with regular TV work, let alone Got Talents. Is that something that you've ever wanted to do, or is that something that's not kind of on your bucket list? Or
I don't know how to answer that question for my own good, really, because they I've worked in television as a warm-up act. I've performed for the audience of a lot of TV shows. And for a while, it was kind of my main contract. I'd warm up the audience for A Question of Sport, for The Voice, for Gordon Ramsay's there was a TV show that was supposed to look like it was in America. Here's how expensive it is to make TV shows in America, by the way. They made a competitive cooking show in England where the two main chefs were American, the contestants were American, and the entire audience were American. But it was filmed in London because it was cheaper to do that than it was to actually make it in America. I can't remember what the TV show was called, but it was by Studio Ramsay. Gordon Ramsay wasn't on it, although he was there sometimes, but he wasn't in the show himself. Um, I did that. I did the Extra Factor live and all sorts of different things where I warmed up the audience. So I've seen a lot of how television works, and I don't know that I could say that it's an especially kind environment. It's not something where people who need reassurance or enjoy positive feedback or like to be surrounded by people who aren't complete snakes trying to take your job every single second of the day. TV is quite a mean industry. So I don't know about working in television as a whole. In terms of doing Got Talent shows, I would say I have a complicated relationship with that too, because nearly every single person that's ever been on a talent show and done well is doing the same gigs that I'm doing right now. I go on cruise ships and I work with, like literally a few weeks ago, I was on Princess Cruises and I got on the ship and I went to where I know all the acts stay and I opened my cabin door and I looked on the little slip on the cabin door next to me, and Paul Zerdin was in the cabin next to me, and he won America's Got Talent a few years ago. And I was on the night after him on a Princess cruise ship. It's like, I don't know. I don't know what fees Paul's getting. Maybe because of that show, he's getting astronomically brilliant fees. But I don't really think that's how it works. Almost everybody that I have seen do well on those shows is working in and around the same gigs that I'm already doing. So that taints it for me a little bit. And then There's kind of a problem in that TV shows don't always want you to be who you are. They want you to be who they think will be good on the TV show. And if you're not willing to pretend to be that person in perpetuity after the show, then you lose all the value of being on that show. I love Jamie Raven, and he and I are friends. But there's a reason that Jamie is doing gigs wearing jeans with a white shirt, a jacket, and a pocket square, because that's how he dressed for the final of the show. And if you don't continue to inhabit the caricature that the show made you, then you don't get any of the benefits of having been on the show. All of the people who do well on those shows have to keep pretending to be that exact person afterwards to get the value of it. And there's a quote by Kurt Vonnegut in Slaughterhouse 5 when he says, "We are who we pretend to be, so we must be careful what we pretend to be." And that really stuck with me. If you want, and it happened to me, I'll be honest. Russ Stevens asked me to go on that show, and we worked on an act for quite a while. And I was going to do Silk to Egg in my audition, and Russ wanted me to wear black jeans, a denim jacket, a white t-shirt. I was feeling pretty good at the time. I'd lost a lot of weight. I think I was in my mid 30s. I was kind of had a nice vibe, and I was happy about it. Russ really liked the way that it looked. I worked on the performance. I got really, really ready to do the show. And then they asked me to do some stuff that I wasn't really comfortable with. I didn't want to wear those clothes because that's how I look off stage, and I wanted to be how I am on stage, and I wanted to represent my act. They asked me to say things like, I've been slogging it round Haven Parks for years and years and years, and I'm ready for something better to happen. And whether or not that's true, I wasn't willing to go on television and slag off a company in any way that had been the reason I'd been able to pay my bills for a decade. How could I, with good conscience, go on a show and say, I'm sick of doing this work when actually I love doing that work? And I was really happy and felt, pleased to have it. And it'd been paying my bills for such a long time. So I decided I couldn't do either of those things. I wanted to wear the clothes that I wear on stage. I wanted to be quirky, nostalgic, tweed suit wearing guy. I wanted to say that I work at Haven and I love it and I come from it and I'm proud of my background and I still like to go back there and perform. I wanted to do justice to all the audiences that had seen me be like that in those places. And the show said, okay, we'll get back to you. And they never called me back again. And then I watched a kid do basically my presentation of that trick for their audition and get through and do really well. And I knew them and they were a nice kid and they'd wanted to audition with a completely different trick. And in absence of me doing that show, they'd been given my trick instead because the show loved the kid, but they loved the trick I was going to do. And so they put them together because that's how TV works. And I never had any illusions about that either. I never had any illusions about it with Russ or held any grudge with him about it afterwards, nor did I have any illusions with the show. I even said to them when I would speak to the producer, I know that what we're here to do is make a really good bit of television. So let's not you throw me under the bus or sell me down the river or anything. Just know that I understand it and I'm willing to go along to a degree to get what we all want out of this. Let's just make a great TV clip and be honest with each other all the way through it. And maybe I was too knowing for them, or maybe I wasn't willing enough to just sell my principles out to get a bit of TV exposure. But in either way, I never ended up on the show. But the thing that I was going to do did, and I learned a lot from that. So that's probably why I wouldn't do Britain's Got Talent. However, would I do America's Got Talent? Yes, but for different reasons.
Well,
My
you've got a name over there now, haven't you? Like you're regularly performing over in America.
I don't know that I've got a name. I've got three venues that I work at regularly. I do the Magic Castle a lot. I just came back from there a week ago. I do the House of Cards in Nashville a lot. I'm going there later in the year. I do the Chicago Magic Lounge a lot. I'm going there later in the year. So I've got a few places that I work, but I don't know that I've got a name. But the difference between America's Got Talent and Britain's Got Talent is that if you do Britain's Got Talent, firstly, if I go to Haven Parks a year after doing Britain's Got Talent, everybody's going to say he's only here because he did that show. And the truth is, I was there already. So I don't want my merit to be taken away. I got that stuff without the show. So that would annoy me. Secondly, there's a risk. What if you go on there and you die a death? What if, you get stitched up like I know other performers have done recently? And even in this upcoming season, I know someone who just got seen on TV and it looked like their audition didn't go well, but I know the reality of it is that their audition did go well, but the show don't care. So what if you get thrown under the bus like that? That's a big risk in the town where you live, in the country where you live. To get negative TV exposure like that is a bad thing. And mainly, if you go on Britain's Got Talent, even if you win it, you only perform three times. Judges audition, semi-finals, final. That's your entire journey. Three performances, as I know you know, of course. So that's not a huge amount. Whereas if you go on America's Got Talent, even if you only make it to the semi-finals, you perform three times. And if you
Yeah.
win it, you perform five times. So you don't need to win America's Got Talent to do really, really well out of it because you get five huge pieces of exposure. And for me, my ultimate goal and my wife and my son, our family goal is that we want to live in America. So doing America's Got Talent would be much more beneficial for me with that goal in mind. So would I do a Got Talent show? God, I realized I gave up a lot then, and I just told you a lot of things that I've never said out loud to anybody before. But I wouldn't do Britain's Got Talent, but I would do America's Got Talent, but for completely different reasons.
That makes sense. But it's important that you kind of know where you get. What you're talking about here is goal setting. You're talking about
Yeah,
like having goals, and the amount of people I interview and they go, I haven't got a goal. I just go with the flow. And I'm very goal orientated, and I really do believe that it's so important, and it allows you to make decisions and have crystal clarity of the decisions or the choices that you're making, because ultimately you know where you want to be.
you have to know that you want something. Otherwise, what's the
Yeah.
point? And if you don't know that you want something, I just don't know what you're doing. You have to have goals, even if they're small. I want to be able to juggle three balls in a month from now, or I want to be able to eat fire, or I want to be able to do an hours long show by myself, or and the longer you go and the more things you achieve. I think I've always been the sort of person. It's funny, we started this interview and you read all that stuff out about me, and I said it never feels like that from inside. I guess the reason is that I've also believed that if people, that phrase, if people don't laugh at your dreams, they aren't big enough. It's one of the best phrases ever. And it's absolutely true. Your goals and your dreams should be way beyond what you think you're capable of. Because the truth is, whenever you get close to achieving something that was once a goal, you've already set your sights on something else past that. If your goals are close to you, so you never get the sense of achievement. And that's why when you say to me, oh, you're really successful and you've done all of these things, it doesn't feel like that to me. Because right before I did the Magic Castle, there was already something else beyond that that I'd started to think, oh, I'd like to do that as well. And always the same with everything. And don't get me wrong, performing at the Magic Castle was and remains the greatest, most exciting thing in my life. I love it. I love being in LA. I love performing at the Magic Castle. And that first time when I did it was a really life-altering experience. It felt like an affirmation in a lot of ways, and it felt like an achievement, and it felt like Steve Martin says in his book Born Standing Up about being hugged after a show. And he said, I felt like I hadn't been hugged in years. He'd grown up with a, father who was not really responsive to him. And he says, I felt like I hadn't been hugged in years. And after my first show at the Magic Castle, Jack Goldfinger, who's the enigmatic booker of the Magic Castle, he said, you've arrived, and he hugged me. And I really knew what Steve Martin felt. I knew what he meant. I felt like I hadn't been hugged in years. And I don't mean I feel like I hadn't been hugged. I meant like I hadn't been told by anybody whose opinion I really valued that what I was doing was worth doing. And being told by the booker at the Magic Castle, oh, this thing that you've done, you're here, you made it, you can relax now, it's okay, felt huge. And actually, the next time I felt that was at the Magic Castle again. And sometimes at the Magic Castle, you can do the kid shows as well. They have a weekend show Saturday and Sunday, and you perform for families. And it's the only time kids are ever allowed in the Magic Castle. So you perform for the first three rows will be all kids, and then it's all adults up the wings, at the back, standing every seat, jam packed. And I always do those shows on the weekends. And my family were able to come to those shows as well. My wife and son were both in LA. So my son, put a suit on. I mean, looked like one of the Peaky Blinders. He wore a flat cap and everything because he's kind of nostalgic too. And he came to the Magic Castle, and my wife had a cocktail dress on and all of that. And they came in the Magic Castle, and I did my show. And I did what I always do, which is I leave before the audience, and I go and stand in the corner so that I can shake everybody's hand on the way past and say thank you for coming. And my wife and son were in the front on the corner, so they managed to get out before me. So I came out after them, and they went and stood in the corner, and I said, "Just give me 1 second." And I shook hands with everyone who was leaving, and little kids were going past high fiving me, and everybody. Oh, this is going to be hard for me to say. Um, Everybody that walked past was saying to me, "That was amazing. That's the best magic show we've ever seen." All the adults were saying it to me, but crucially, all the kids too, high fiving me. "Oh my God, you were amazing, sir." Because little American kids are so polite. "Sir, that was amazing. You were all of these things." And I looked over to my wife and son, and my son was absolutely crying his eyes out, like floods of tears. Um, and I think it wasn't just being in the place and seeing the show. I think seeing other kids respond to your father in that way and saying all of these nice things and all of these adults. And my son saw this new value and this new thing in it. And to look at him, and he was crying his eyes out. And then I just immediately started to cry too. And it was a really amazing moment and experience. And I've only ever told that story two or three times, and it makes me cry every single time. It's
And
such a moment. But being in those places, things can happen at that high level that affirm your choices and affirm your life in a really, really resonating way. And that's why they've both stuck with me so much. But even when you're doing those things, you should always have your sights on something else. So right now, I'm doing the Magic Castle, the Chicago Magic Lounge, the House of Cards. I'm performing on Princess Cruises. I'm traveling the world. I'm doing holiday parks like I always have done. I'm doing all of these shows. What do I want? I want to be in the Illusionists. I want to be in a cast show in Las Vegas. I want to be a person in something way bigger than me by myself. I want to be a cog in a much bigger machine. Um, so I love doing all of those gigs, and I've got them in my diary the whole year. I'm booked right now until next February, but I'm really hoping that at some point between now and then, I can find opportunities to fill the year after that are bigger than that again. And that's, I think you've got to have those goals. Otherwise, you're just going round and round and round.
yeah, that's great, man. This is a masterclass. I hope people are really paying attention. It really is. I want to ask you a couple of other things. A lot of magicians during lockdown and during COVID just disappeared or got jobs delivering whatever. It felt looking at you that you were more relevant than ever before. Like it was a masterclass watching you during lockdown because while most magicians were just like crying into their glitter, you were doing multiple podcasts. Like more people were talking about you than ever before. You were doing online academies. You were like jumping in and like what. I'm obviously COVID's behind us now, but I was really impressed with how you almost like reinvented yourself during lockdown. Again, was that a kind of a conscious decision of, okay, I'm stuck in my house, I have to do something, I've achieved a certain level of success. Yeah, yeah, what was going through your head at that point?
Well, what I can say is that I've never ever been motivated by money. No, it's just not a factor for me at all. I'm equally as happy, and I know a lot of people say that when they're rich, by the way. I'm not rich. I will be totally honest and tell you, I very, very rarely have more money than whatever my last gig paid. I'm really, really, really bad with money. I love to buy things. I love vinyl records, glasses, watches, trainers. pens, like anything that's pointless and expensive, I'm into it. So I'm really, really financially irresponsible, which is why I have to work so much. But what I can also say is that I'm no less happy with no money in the bank at all than if I've just done a really good gig. Say I do a cruise ship for a couple of weeks and I get a big paycheck. It doesn't change my mood at all to if I haven't worked for a month and I've got literally no money. If we have dinner, if we've got the money for dinner that night, I'm okay. That's all I need. So when it came to lockdown, I didn't necessarily go into the same spiral or difficulties or depression or mindset that a lot of people went into. Because a lot of people, of course, were distressed about their loss of income. But that part never really bothered me. I knew that I wasn't about to make any money, but I also wasn't that scared by it. My wife and I, we always do this thing every year called two different months we have Februarians and No Spender November, which sounds odd, but they're just little things that came out of old habits. So Februarians is that we all as a family become vegetarians just through February. So we don't need any meat in February at all for no reason other than I'd read a thing years ago about how bad meat was for us, even though I love it, and we have meat every other day of every other month of the whole year. I said, let's see if we can do a month where we don't eat meat. We'll be called Februarians. And they both laughed. And we did it. And now, 6 or 7 years later, we've done it every year since. No spend in November, when we particularly were struggling, we weren't going to have any money at the end of the season, because the holiday park season finishes in October. So I'd said to my wife, what it would be really good to do is just delete a financial month out of the diary because the next holiday park season starts at the beginning of March. So you've got that gap, November, December, January, February. Imagine if we could just financially delete November and not spend any money at all. And then we're another month ahead and we keep all that money. And now we've only got to survive 3 months. And it just has become a habit. So now for 10 years in November, we try our very, very best to spend no money at all. We'll save up, we'll stock the pantry, fill the fridge, fill the freezer, and I sort of gamify things so that they feel fun as opposed to challenging. Turning if you can turn not spending money into a game, it can be fun and you can enjoy it and you can look back and go, oh, normally I would have done that, but I didn't. So I tend to gamify things like that. So through those little weird habits, when lockdown came around, and you remember we didn't know how long it was going to be at first, I
Yep.
just thought, okay, it's a few weeks. If we just do a no spender November right now, we will not notice. And of course, it wasn't November, but we'll be fine. We'll just delete a few weeks financially out of the diary. We'll shop cheap and we'll live on almost nothing. We'll turn it into a game and we'll make it fun. We've got a million Blu-rays. We've got, we'll just watch films and it'll be good. So that's what I started to do. But also, I was friends, and I am friends. My best friend is Taylor Hughes, Californian magician, and we met at the Magic Castle. I was a big fan of his podcast. It was called About to Break, and he always had magicians and former child actors and all sorts of people in and around LA on his podcast. And when I was going to be at the Magic Castle, I messaged Taylor and I said, I love your podcast. I'm going to be in LA. I don't expect you will have heard of me. This was in 2018. So I had penguins out and stuff like that, but I don't expect you'll have heard of me. Here's a blog I wrote about working at the Magic Castle the first time. It'll tell you how I think about things. And if there's anything in this that you find interesting, I'd love to be a guest on your podcast. He said, I'm going to come and watch you at the Magic Castle. We'll record the podcast afterwards. He watched me at the castle. I had a quite good set that year. He really liked it. We did the podcast. It was great. We became instant best friends. And so that was a year or two before COVID happened. And Taylor is a real yes person who also is very, very, very goal oriented. He's recorded his shows and put them out on Amazon and YouTube. He's released books. He's done podcasts. He's done all of those things that you're now crediting me for having done. But really, I took a lot of my kind of inspiration from him. So when lockdown came around, he was the one who said, there's still an opportunity here to make money and do shows online. And here's what we got to do. Because he had corporate clients and stuff booked in, and they were suggesting shifting to online and still using him. So I took that kind of note. And I bought a Rodecaster sound desk that everyone bought for doing podcasting. I got a Sony camera, but a real cheap one off eBay. A good camera, but cheap from eBay. I learned how to use Ecamm and all of those things that people were using. And I set up a studio in my office. My wife and I went out there and we painted the whole space. And we got some cheap box lights and put them up and did the very best thing that we could. And I started offering myself to magic clubs to lecture. But then also this opportunity came around that was these murder mystery shows. And essentially, what would happen is a corporate company would book, it was through a company called Black Rabbit Promotions. They don't do these anymore, but they still are a company. They would get a company book and say there would be 12 people, and it would be 3 o'clock on a Monday afternoon. So they would all get a separate email. All 12 people that were booked would get a different email. And their email would say, "Welcome to the experience, blah, 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 blah. Your character is the pilot. Try and dress like a pilot. Here are your clues. Here's some script for you to work on. We look forward to seeing you at 3 p.m. on Monday." Another person on that same call would get, "You are the rock star. Dress like a rock star. Here are your clues," all that stuff. And so they would turn up and there would be a lead detective who worked for the company like I did, and they would appear on camera with a magnifying glass. "Ah, I see you're all here today. Welcome to the thing. I see we have a pilot and a rock star and this and that. We'll get to know each other in a second. But firstly, there's been a murder, and we're going to solve who's done this murder. Here's how it will work, etc. Now let's introduce yourselves. Pilot, tell me about yourself." And then the person who was the pilot would go full screen and they would say, "Oh, I've been flying for 10 years." And they would read out whatever was in the email they'd had and they would act it all out. And every character would do that, and then the detective would say, "Well, from this I've learned that the pilot likes to have a drink before a flight, and the rock star was actually in the bathroom with the air hostess, and I've learned all of these things. So you couldn't have been where the murder happened when it happened, but that still leaves all of these characters. Maybe we should call in a private investigator. Their name is Mark James, and I would appear on screen. And literally, I would appear on screen holding a crowbar as a joke because my part was really crowbarred into the show to give the excuse to have a magician perform. I didn't add any value to the murder mystery experience, but it would allow a 10-minute gap in the hour and a half experience where those people would then just sit and watch a magician perform. And I would perform direct to camera and I would do 10 minutes and I would do chop cup, 6 card repeat, and multiplying bottles. And then I would say at the end of that thing, because I could do all of those things direct to camera with no interaction necessarily. I could say to someone, "Where do you think the ball is now?" But I didn't need a huge amount from them. And then at the end of my bit, I would say, "So remember, I had 2 fruits, 6 cards, and 9 bottles. 269. That's the code that you're going to need for the safe or whatever." And then I would go. And then the detective would finish out the experience and they would insert that clue 269 into the proceedings. And that would be the whole thing. And they paid 50, 60 quid a show. But honestly, some days I did 10 of those. There was a point when it was absolutely insane how busy it was. And sometimes if I knew the host, the detective really well, I would take the piss and I would say, "So the clue is 269. But don't forget, and this clue is going to be the most important, the owl never eats shredded wheat after midnight," because then the detective would have to find a way to put that into the script because I'd said it as if it was important. So then they would have to write it down and think, "Oh my God." So every time before the show, I would talk to them and they would say, "Do me a favor, just give the clue and don't mess about." And I would go, "Yeah, no, don't worry." And then during the show, I would be, "Remember, the man with the swimming armbands on never walks past the co op at 6 p.m." And they would think, "Oh, for God's sake." And they'd have to put that back in. But I did loads of those. And so it became quite a regular income. And I would be playing Call of Duty with some magicians in my pajamas, and my alarm would go off on my phone. I'd say, "I've got a murder mystery in 10 minutes. I'll be back." I'd go in the office, I'd put my suit on, I'd do the 10-minute show, I'd log back out, I'd come back in the living room, put my pajamas back on, get back, pick up my controller and put my headphones on, and they'd still be in the same game of Call of Duty that I'd left 25 minutes earlier. I'd drop back in and play with them and we'd win the game or do whatever. And that would be it. And I loved it. When lockdown was over, the only person who was devastated was me because my life of doing shows all the time, but being with my family all day, I never had it so good. And sometimes the money was great and I'd do loads of shows, and then sometimes there wouldn't be one for 2 weeks. And I would just think, oh, you know what, we're gamifying not spending money. So I'll just do that. Then I got into doing those same online shows, but I did them with a Magic Castle. So it would be me, Carissa Hendricks did a lot of them. A couple of other magicians. I did a lot of them with Carissa. So they would do the Magic Castle experience in LA, and the Magic Castle would do takeout. So if you ordered a meal from the Magic Castle's kitchen and got it delivered to your house, you also got a ticket for the online Magic Castle experience. It's crazy. So they would eat Magic Castle food at home, but they would watch Magic Castle magicians via a Zoom show. So I did loads of those with Carissa. But what it meant for me, because it was in LA, was quite often I was getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning, going out into the office, doing a Zoom show, and then going back to bed at 4:30 in the morning, every night doing Zoom shows at 4 a.m. because that's when the work was. But it was a strange time of life. But I figured if I've got the office set up, I've got the camera, I've got the setup, I might as well do as much with it as I can. So I lectured for the Magic Circle, I did Alakazam Academies, I recorded podcasts. I just did everything I could with the time that I had and the materials that were in front of me, because otherwise, what's the point? It
Mhm.
wasn't out of any ambition. It was just out of boredom and kind of opportunity.
Wow, that's amazing. That really is amazing. I know I've spoken to a lot of people, and they're really upset that your podcast isn't on still. Like it was like every week that because you had a couple of them, didn't you? And every week magicians would be tuning in for that podcast. And I
Well,
somebody asked a question the other day on my channel about, can you convince Mark James to bring the podcast back? I'm like, I'm pretty sure he's busy, too busy to do that these days.
it never got that many listeners. That was kind of the frustration for me. It was a podcast different to everyone else's, I guess, because, I would watch. I loved hearing people like Lance Burton and Matt King on podcasts, but every single time I would hear them, I would hear Mac tell the story of how him and Lance had met at Cemetery Junction, and they'd known each other since they were kids. And then Mac would start to talk about a bit of his act. And then the podcast host, who was usually out of their depth with regards to talking to someone like Mac King about their act, they would veer back to some story about their lives. And I would always think, oh, I want to hear about the act. I want the performer to talk about how they came up with that bit of material, or where the genesis
Right.
of this idea was. Or so I thought that podcast is not going to exist unless I make it. So I set out to make a podcast that only talked about the act. No backstory, no life lessons. Talk to me about the act. So everybody that I had on there sent me a video or some recordings of them performing, and I saw video that no other human has ever seen. Ben Hart, I watched his entire recorded, multiple camera, microphoned, 2-hour theatre show. He's never put it out. I say to him all the time, Ben, this show is amazing. You need to put it out online. And he never has done. But Ben has got a multiple camera recorded show that's 2 hours long, filmed at Wilton's Music Hall in the West End, that nobody except me and about 12 other people have ever seen. And I interviewed him about the whole show. I saw performances from, I had Carissa on as an example, David Kaplan, the great Kaplan. I had Mario, the Maker Magician, really amazing people. And we just talked about their act. And it was fantastic. I loved it. But I guess because it focused on stage magic, and I guess because, the guests were quirky stage performers in a lot of cases, it just didn't really have the wide appeal that other podcasts that were blowing up at the time. Richard Young was doing a fantastic job with the Magicians podcast, which
Yeah.
I always listened to, and other people had products like that that were doing really, really well. And mine just never really seemed to take off. I also did a thing on, what was that thing that came out for a while that everybody was doing audio on, and it was like an app. It was
Clubhouse.
kind of Clubhouse. That's right.
I think
I did
some
a thing
people still
on.
use it. It's still,
Do they?
still a thing. Yeah.
I did a thing during lockdown on that too, where I had people on, and the idea was that it was just me and a guest, and I would say something really inflammatory to them, and they would have to argue against my point. So I would say, but it was really funny, and it was not recorded. So I would have Carissa Hendricks on, and I would say, Carissa, why are women so shit at magic? And then she would, go crazy at me about it. And then I would have, Kennedy on, and I would say, Kennedy, why are mentalists so unbelievably boring? And he would, go at me about it. And I would play devil's advocate, nearly always with points that I didn't agree with. Of course, I don't think women are shit at magic. I don't think mentalists are boring. But using that ability that we talked about earlier, where I feel like I can argue even a point that I don't agree with, I would be that counterpoint and just play devil's advocate with that magician to help them really express their point.
Hmm.
And yeah, it was great, but again, it never really had that many listeners. So I often feel like I put products out and I release things, and the people who get them tell me, God, I got a lot of value out of that, or it really changed my life, or that they loved my downloads or whatever. But I never really feel like the things I put out have huge mass market appeal. I feel like for the small amount of people who get them, they tell me it's among the best things they saw or heard or liked. But I don't feel like the general population of magic pays that much attention to the things that I release. Whereas you, I think, are the opposite. I think that everything you put out gets huge amounts of attention. And so I would love to have that happen to me, but I don't think that the things I put out, I think they're more niche by virtue of the fact that
Yeah.
they're always stage magic and they're always aesthetic driven or whatever, I
Well, I
just,
mean, magic is a niche in itself, but then when you talk about stage magic, that's a niche within a niche, because now
yeah,
you're speaking about people who, let's be honest, most magicians they gravitate towards close-up magic, hobbyists
yeah.
especially and amateurs who probably make up 70-80% of the buying public when it comes to magicians. Somebody who's going to really study your work on stagecraft is somebody who performs regularly on stage.
Yeah.
So probably because it's a niche with a niche, but that's actually brings me up to kind of maybe one final question, which is I've talked about your goals, I've talked about everything that you've got, everything that you've achieved up until this point is phenomenal. We've talked about how successful you are, and you travel the world performing magic. You don't have to worry about when your next gig's coming in. You've literally just sat there and went, I'm booked through to February next year. And I'm looking for bigger stuff the following year. And that's an amazing situation that most magicians would literally give their right tit to be in. Like you,
That's a curse, though, a little bit. A magic club just asked me if I could lecture for them. And I said, when do you want me? And they asked me, and I said, I've got Tuesday next week free. And they said, oh, that's way too soon. What about this Tuesday? And I looked and I went, no, I don't have that Tuesday. And then I looked through my whole diary and I said, actually, I don't have a Tuesday free until March. And when you realize something like that, like, oh my God, I'm working every Tuesday until March, that kind of feels a bit, it's
yeah,
great,
it's
but it does blow
driving
your mind a little
mental. So
bit.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
mad. I mean, but you were in a situation that a lot of magicians would dream to be in,
Oh
and
yeah, and I,
and
I
you,
don't take it for granted at all. And the support that magicians do give me, I have to say, is I don't think that I'm divisive in any way. Magicians' reactions to me seem to be universally positive. I don't seem to really upset anyone or draw a huge amount of dislike from people, which I know is not something that I know that you've struggled with that in the past, and for some reason,
once or
people
twice.
take against you every now and again. I don't think I've ever generated that sort of feeling among them. So I am honestly eternally grateful for it, and I try to keep my nose clean in most senses. So I do recognize it's a hugely privileged position, and I don't take it for granted ever. I must say that.
And but here's the thing. You could just I know you're not going to because you've already talked about all of your goals, but you could coast now and just be great right until the end of your career. But you're very ambitious, you're very goal orientated. You already spoke about a lot of the things that you're doing. You also said that you felt that a lot of the tricks that you've brought out in the past, or a lot of the projects that you've been involved with, haven't been seen by a wider audience.
Yeah.
But now you're bringing your own. You've just brought out a new download,
Mhm.
specifically through you, which I know we're going to do another video on, but I'd like to talk about that briefly now. And also, like, is that going to be? Are you going to kind of delve more into the creative side of things?
I
Um,
think I think I'm going to start doing things off my own bat a little bit more. Because one thing about putting things out for yourself is that you don't need it to be that successful to make the same amount of money as you would make if you put it out through another company. If a company offers to give you £2,000 to make a download, you don't have to sell that many of them yourself. You only have to get 100 people to buy it if it's 20 quid before you've made that money anyway. So probably doing things by yourself is a good. I mean, ask Bill Abbott about it. Bill Abbott had an astonishing career of releasing magic by himself. And I was just with Bill at the Magic Castle, which has been the genesis of this a little bit, because Bill really gave me some stick and said, "Why don't you just put things out for yourself? Why do you put things out through companies all the time? Do your own thing, and you'll find that you don't have to sell as many before people are talking about it, and then get your own audience, get your own mailing lists, and all of that." So Bill kind of put it in my head, like, you should be doing your own thing. And that made me finally go, okay, well, if I can't listen to Bill Abbott's advice, I'm an idiot. So that's what made me start, really. And then my friend Taylor as well. Taylor came to the Magic Castle to film me on the Thursday of the week that I was there a couple of weeks ago. And he said, "You should be putting this stuff out." So I had the download that you're talking about, of course, in the more immediate sense. I've just released is called Five Card Routines for Stage and Parlor. And part of it was to try and bridge that gap between the close up magicians that I know I haven't been touching, because there's a lot of close up magicians that have got the skills to perform on stage that they're not using on stage. And there's a lot of stage performers that have got skills they learned at close up and they're not using those skills on stage too. So I figured stage card tricks is a good place to start. And it's something that I've always done in every single show of mine. I've always had a kind of set piece card trick, but I also like to get value out of an idea. So if ever I've done a card trick on stage, it's never, pick a card, sign your name on it. It vanishes, it's in my wallet. That's way too short to set up that idea and then do that with it. You might as well not bother. So for me, it's always been a multiple selection and 8 cards to pocket, something that if I'm getting a deck out, I'm going to really do something with it. So I've always had those kind of routines in my act. And Taylor said to me, having watched my show just, "I'm doing a thing right now in my show, which to the audience I call the 3 types of card trick." And I do the Thurston 5 card trick, which is card manipulation. But it's an old trick, of course, because it's Howard Thurston, but it's really, really nice in terms of the way that it's routined. You vanish a card, and then you reproduce it, and then you vanish it, and then show that it's really gone, like showing both sides, and you reproduce it, and then you vanish it again, but now you take another one and that goes, another one that goes, another one that goes. And there's a really nice moment when 4 cards have vanished, which us magicians know what's happening. You place the 5th one, but you also transfer the previous ones over so that now you can cleanly show this 5th one and vanish
Oh,
it.
lovely.
And then when you reproduce that, you show it as a real singular card. And then as you take that one back, you reposition. So now you can produce those 4 cards individually. It's a really nice piece of routining. So in my act, I do that. But then I also do a card to pocket, a signed card to pocket. And then after the card to pocket, I do a third trick, which in my case ends with a sketchpad card rise. Because I really like when a set of card trick ends with a sketchpad card rise, a regular card rise, a card sword, something that's like a set piece in itself that's clearly the end of it. So I was doing that in my act, and Taylor said magicians could really benefit from seeing your approach to card magic on stage. That you take a card trick and you expand on the idea, and then you make it into something that has a stage filling finale, and you put it in the middle of your act. So I took those things, and then I took footage from last year when I was at the Magic Castle, and I did the this 8 cards to pocket routine, which is super slide heavy but really fun. I took footage from the Chicago Magic Lounge where I did the multiple selection. And then I also filmed my version of the 6 card repeat, which I hadn't done for a few years, but it's different to others because you show 6 cards, but you throw away one. And then in the story, you show six, but now you throw away two. And then you show the six, now you throw away three, and you show six. But then in the telling of the story in the magic shop, you say, "So I asked the guy, do you sell the trick where the guy throws away one?" "No, sorry, it was one, two." "No, actually, it was one, two, three." "Wait a minute, that's six altogether, but I still have six." And so in my version of the 6 card repeat, you never throw away the same amount of cards twice. It builds and builds and builds and builds till it becomes its own finale. So I took 5 routines, 6 card repeat, 8 cards to pocket, card to pocket, multiple selection, and the Thurston 5 card trick. And I put them all in a singular download with HD filmed performances from the Magic Castle and the Chicago Magic Lounge. And then I recorded all the explanations in a studio and put it out as a single thing. And it's an hour and 45 minutes long. It's $50, which is £38. And the people who've bought it so far have really raved about it. Mark, I was blown away the other day. I looked at my email, and you, of course, when you sell anything through Squarespace, you get an email every time you sell one. So, and I haven't sold bundles of them, by the way. I think I'm only at the moment at about 30 downloads, but which, for someone like you who puts out tricks and they blow up, 30 must seem like, we're
I
only just
know.
getting started. And hopefully I am only getting started. But I saw that I'd sold one and I clicked, and it was Mark Paul, the mind reader. Mark Paul is like a
Wow.
legend. So I sent him a message on Facebook saying, "Hey Mark, I just want to say how thrilled I am that you bought my work. Like that's really blown my mind because I'm such a big fan of yours. So thank you." And he emailed me back saying, and I've used the quote on a Facebook post just, he emailed me back saying, this download is an absolute masterclass in card magic on stage. I love these routines when I saw you lecture them at the Magic Circle, and I can't quite believe you're giving this away in a download. But I'm pleased to have seen. And he really raved about it and said, "You're such a talented, and engaging performer and all this stuff." And I just read it like, I can't believe this just happened. So I emailed him back saying, "Do you mind if I use this as a quote?" And he said yes. So that was very kind of him. So the people who've got it so far have really responded to it and liked it. Um, I've sent it to you, of course. I know you haven't had time to watch it yet, but the work is all stuff that is in my real work. They're real things from my show. If you want to see the performances, you don't have to buy the download. They're on YouTube right now. You can go and see them. I've never shied away from putting my whole act online, and I do. So I'm not trying to get anyone to buy anything that they haven't seen. The trailer is literally a few clips, but the whole routines are online already because I just want the work to stand on its own. The teaching is good, it's thorough, it's clear, which I hopefully think I'm known for in terms of my Penguin Lives and stuff. And it's all material I really do. So hopefully
Well,
I'll bridge the gap. And
yeah, bridging the gap. That's the perfect thing to say there. The amount of people that come to me on my channel and they say, I do close-up magic. I want to do a stage show. I want to perform on stage, but I don't have the money to buy really lots of big fancy boxes. Can I take what I do in a close-up environment and bring it onto stage? This is the perfect product for that person. If you've
I
got
mean,
if you've got skill with the deck of cards and you can be shown how to take that and just make it
yeah.
way bigger by doing the same moves and sleights that you already do, but just learning how to do it in a different way, there's a big audience for that, Mark. There really is. Especially,
I mean, those
I,
three tricks, the Thurston 5 card trick, the card to pocket, and the sketchpad card rise, that and the cups and balls was my entire 20 minutes at the Magic Castle. Sort of 12 to 14 minutes of it used nothing but a singular deck of playing cards. And it was the best bit. The audience liked it. If you know how to frame it and interact with people and, get a lot of stuff out of it, it can be really good.
absolutely, and a perfect lesson in packing small and playing big.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, and I know you said am I going to do this more often. I've already put some coming soons on my website where you can buy this download because I came up with this idea which I'm calling the double feature series. Again, nostalgia, go to the movies, you'd see a double feature. Once upon a time there was the movie, but then there was also the B film, a B movie. So that's what I've done because I often have tricks that are similar to each other, but they function in different shows. I have 2 shows, but I use the same formula quite a lot. So I do half-dyed silk, but I also do silk to egg. I don't do them in the same show, but they fill exactly the same spot in 2 different shows. So I've got a download which is coming out soon, which is called Double Feature, and it teaches you silk to egg and half-dyed silk. And
Perfect.
again, the Silk to Egg performance is from the Chicago Magic Lounge. The Half Dyed Silk is from the Magic Castle. But you get those 2 performances plus my explanations of them. There's another download double feature series, which is Cups and Balls, but then also the Chop Cup as 2 separate routines. But in my cups and balls, I do my chop cup routine. My cups and balls is 3 cups, and then I load one and move it to the side. Then it's 2 cups, and I load one and move it to the side. And then I finish with my chop cup, and then I reveal all the loads at the end. But all the staging and all of my loads and the reasons that I use them. And I talk about how the trick in Spain, they use 3 cups, and in France, they use two. Duh. And in America, they just use one. And I do all these phases. But then at the end of the routine, I produce a baseball because it's the American version of the trick. Then I say, remember, we started in Spain, orange. Then we went to France, onion. And I'm from England, cricket ball. So the loads all make sense in terms of the
Right.
routining of it. But as part of that, you learn the chop cup too as a separate routine also, because the chop cup is the final phase of my cups and balls. So that's one. And then I've also got a kind of mind reading double feature, which has got my blindfolded book test and my jelly bean prediction as well. So any time the two tricks feel to me like they kind of sit comfortably, I'll put those out as a double feature thing. And I'm selling those on my website when they're released for £20 each per double feature. But then you can get the complete double feature series with all six for £40. So yeah,
You know what?
they're
I think that you could be one of the biggest creators in Magic. And I'll tell no, really, and I'll tell you why. I'm going to pay you the biggest compliment that I've ever paid anybody, because you remind me of somebody, and you have so many qualities in common with this person. First of all, you're very charismatic, you're very likable, you're incredible on stage. You come with your own material, you take classics and you make them better. You've got a background in performing. You can sing and you can play musical instruments, and your focus is on stage, and you explain things very, very clearly. I think that you could very easily be the next Scott Alexander. There are so
wow.
many crossovers between you and Scott. When I actually sit here thinking about it, there is so much, and even watching the two of you perform, I say it's the biggest compliment because he was my favorite magician of all time, rest his soul. And I really do believe that there is a huge similarity between what Scott offered to the magic community that has not been filled, by the way. Scott, there's not anybody that stepped into Scott's shoes and said, well, I could approach this in the same way. Nobody has. And I think that you're positioned to be able to do that. I really do.
Well, that's certainly a big compliment, and I was a huge fan of Scott's too, and that feels like something to aim for. Scott was around a long time too. When I worked at JB Magic, and this is 20 years ago, Scott had the midnight show and the 10 o'clock show out on DVD, and great material. And of course, his book was fantastic. And I had the pleasure of working at the Magic Castle when Scott and Puck were doing a duo show together in the Palace, and so I got to hang out with Scott a little bit then, and we talked about the chop cup because he did chop cup too, and some other tricks, that we both had in common. And I performed Scott's version of the needle swallowing for years and years. I think it was the best version of that trick. So, yeah, I really take that as a huge compliment. I think the leap for me to get into the same kind of, not that I could ever imagine myself being in the same stratosphere as Scott, but to be positioning like that, I would have to start releasing routines that included props too, because that always seems to go really well. When you put stuff out and you include the props, that takes on a totally different place in Magic. That big suppliers like Murphy's and all of them, they then want to stock it, and then it goes into a lot of different shops. And even though you're selling off your own bat, you are being stocked around the world by other people, which is not necessarily the way it goes with downloads. But yeah, I mean, I'm thrilled with that, Craig. That's a really nice thing to say, and I actually think that within that compliment, you've probably given me some direction. I think that that's something to aim for,
Yeah.
because I was a huge fan of Scott Stewart. I've got his book on the shelf right behind me.
Right. He was amazing. He really was. I'm glad I got a chance to interview him before he passed away. Yeah. Where can people buy this? Where can people go and buy this
Right
down?
now,
Look at all the other double features that are coming out soon.
yeah, right now it's on my website. There's only two things that you can currently buy on my website. One of them is this. It's magicianmarkjames.com, nice and easy. If you type in Mark James Magician, you'll still find me. I have both, but the kind of lead website is magicianmarkjames.com. There's a section which is titled Magicians, and it's in there. The only other thing you can buy is a product that I wanted to sell via Penguin, but we never got round to it. And they said I could just sell it myself. And it's my Penguin Live, my 2020 Penguin Live, which I still think is one of the best things I've ever made. The first hour of it was just a show. I broke it down into two shows, and I called one the usual show and one the unusual show. And kind of it speaks to what I was saying earlier about having the same format. I think the second trick in one of them was silk to egg, and the second trick in the other one was half dyed silk, so I kind of stacked things up together. But it was two 30-minute shows was the first hour of the lecture. And so the release that I have for sale on my website is that 1 hour of just performance, but the audio track is overdubbed, and it's me and Taylor Hughes talking about the show as it's happening.
Wow,
Because
that's
when I
great.
was a kid, I remember I got American Pie on DVD, and I remember watching American Pie with the director's commentary on and some of the actors talking about the film. And it's not something that you really see now as a special feature on a lot of movies, but I used to love it when I was younger. So I made that and I sent it to Penguin and they loved it. And I thought it would kind of revolutionize magic, to be honest. I thought that having the show, but with the performer talking over the top of it as things happened, and Taylor saying to me, like, oh, that person just did this. How did that affect? And then getting to really break it down differently. So that's something I think I'll look to do on my own downloads more in future. But that's for sale on my website too. That's like £6. It's $8. It's nothing. So if you've seen my Penguin Live, you might really enjoy that. But that and this download are both for sale on magicianmarkjames.com. And yeah, the card one is $50. But like I said, you get 5 card routines that you they vary from easy to, I would say, fairly difficult. The 8 cards to pocket is certainly for quite advanced sleight of hand performers, but the other stuff is very accessible.
That's perfect. And a review is coming soon with that as well. So look out for the review. It is coming soon. If not already out by the time you watch this, I'm not sure. But Mark, this has been an incredible, incredible interview. I could talk for another 2 hours. You are so easy to talk to. You've got so many stories. You've done so much. You've bought the t-shirt, then you've bought it again. And I know you've got big goals, and I know you're going to hit them because every single
This is
night,
today's t-shirt.
it's a great t-shirt.
If you've ever been, if you're in Vegas, if you ever walk to the fabulous Las Vegas sign, just before you get there on the left is this thing that says pinball in it huge, and it's a pinball museum. I love pinball. They've got 150 pinball machines in there, and you
Wow.
can play them all for like 50 cents. And I bought this shirt there. I had
Next
to
time,
say that because
next.
you're being too nice about me, and I find that just a bizarre and uncomfortable scenario.
Oh, okay. Well, let me try and do something I've never done on this channel before. So I'm so sorry you've had to waste the last 2 hours of your life listening to this man drivel on about absolutely nothing. Honestly, I'm sitting here considering hitting the gin hard just so I can try and make the memory fade. I can't do it. You're too good. No, I'm trying. I'm trying my hardest. You're too nice. But I want everyone who's watching this to do two things. First of all, I want you to go and pick up everything that Mark has on his website, and then secondly, leave a comment down below and support this man because he is he is one of the good guys in magic, and I've always felt that way. And just to see how much you've achieved and you continue to achieve, starting off, as working at Haven, living above Joke Pops Magic, JB Magic, to now traveling the world and doing your thing. And it's amazing. It's a true success story. Mark, congratulations.
Thanks, buddy. That's really kind of you. I'm thrilled to be on. I wonder if somewhere here I've got it. I'm going to reach behind and show you something because someone sent me this when I was asking for it online a few years ago, and I still look at it now all the time with great joy and nostalgia.
Wow.
Remember this?
I remember that. I had that. I would spend hours looking through that thing.
I honestly, if I go to the stage section in here, so I've flicked straight to it because I've opened it that many times. Children's and cabaret magic here. I would honestly have this catalog and I would stare at these things with just dreams of, one day performing them. The mirror box, the perfect illusion, the elusive rabbits. I would look at these Dove pans, the whole list of Dove pans, and just think one day I could own those things too and do them. Some of the stuff in here is wild, by the way. It's funny, isn't it? The magic is now so fast moving that the idea of having a printed book like this that was your catalogue of products is impossible. It's
You couldn't do
ridiculous.
it now. You couldn't do it. No.
So many things come out every week now that it just seems insane. But in here, I would look at this every single day and just think, I would dream of owning these. And look at the prices too. Missing Spade, 69.95. The stuff is so cheap compared to what it is
Isn't it
now.
just?
Look at that Psychic Shopper by Mark Thorold. Did you ever see that, by the way? That was one of the
I
best tricks
did.
ever.
I did. Yeah, with the barcode and the black envelope.
With the barcode and the envelopes, yeah. And
Yeah.
all the DVDs, the One Tamaris Magic volumes, £20 each. I mean, everything's just so cheap compared to what it is now. But yeah, I look at this all the time with such a fondness for my days at JB and my days before JB when I would just stare in this catalogue. I wonder if you've got any products in this. Did you have stuff out then?
Probably not that point. No, I started releasing product at around about 2004, 2005.
Okay. Well, this is about that time, but this catalog would have been made before then. But it's crazy how many names in here of just people that you don't hear from anymore. And Paul Richards, there's another great demonstrator in magic.
It's amazing.
Paul Richard, one of my favorites. There's a bunch of John Kennedy stuff in here. Greg Wilson and John Kennedy. Jay Sankey. I mean, Jay Sankey has just never had a day off, has he?
He's incredible.
Henry Evans. I used to love those Henry Evans close-up things. My
Oh,
favorite.
with coins and everything. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Do you remember modern times where it looked like the deck was in a box and you snapped and the box vanished and then you threw the
Yeah.
deck across the table and it changed from red to blue?
And the work that he did with the Sonata gimmick with the silk and the bag over his hand and the
Oh, mate.
all of that stuff. Yeah, Henry
All
was
of these Dan Harlan DVDs, Dan Harlan's four set that had stuff in. Henry Evans got about eight tricks in here. This is great. I'm going to start looking through this again once we're off the call. But I'm just nostalgia for me, mate. All about
reminiscing,
nostalgia. Yeah,
reminiscing.
reminiscing. Yeah,
Dude,
thanks for having me on. I
you
appreciate
are
it.
absolutely incredible. You really are. And if anybody wants to see Mark perform, you've got your tour schedule. You can see him. He's literally everywhere. There's a very good chance that you'll be able to catch a public show. You perform in a lot of areas and a lot of conventions and a lot of places that you can go and see him. So
I
go
share
and
a lot too. If you look at my Instagram, I often share stuff about today I've posted about my creative process on Instagram, just for people to read that I tend to when I'm putting a show together, the first thing I'll do is Google images of things that I'm interested in and then just put them all on a single page on pages, like a mood board. So I'll have one that'll have a mime and hand shadows and a juggler and cups and balls and props that I'm interested in, or maybe the kind of stools that I want to use, or the kind of shoes that I want to wear. Because I find that if I throw loads of pictures on the same page, you can just get a sense of the aesthetic. You can start to feel like what it might look like. So I've done that for all of my shows in the past. And I've posted pictures of the real ones today on my Instagram. And I shared a thing yesterday about how one of the best creative tools for me is if I've got friends that I've collaborated with. So Taylor's a good example, or Farrell Dillon, or someone, that I used to message a lot about magic. I'll go in my Facebook Messenger chat with them and I'll go on, where you can just look at the pictures and I'll scroll back as far back as I can go. Because I guarantee 10 years ago, I sent those people a picture of something I was interested in, and it's still there in that chat. And maybe when I sent them that picture, I wasn't capable of achieving that idea, but maybe now I am. So I often look back
cool.
at stuff that I sent to collaborators 10 years ago and I screenshot those and I think, oh, how can I do that now? So I posted about that yesterday. So every single day, I share something about my life or about a show I'm doing or about a way that I work on a thing that, maybe someone can find value in too. And it's always just on my Instagram, which again is Magician Mark James.
There you go. You got a lot of value if you follow this man. And like I said, make sure that you do because he's. I genuinely believe you're going to blow up. You've already blown up, but as a creator, you're going to be
You
huge.
haven't even mentioned your son, who learns a lot of my tricks.
My son is your biggest fan. My son literally is your biggest fan, and he does a lot of card manipulation now. So the second that I show him, state he only performs on stage. So the second that I show him all of your stage routines with cards, I think he's gonna be in his element. Put it that way.
I can't wait to see him doing the Thurston five card trick because I loved when he was learning billiard balls.
Oh, he uses your billiard ball routine all the time, every show. He's got a show this weekend, two shows this weekend, and he'll be doing it. So.
He's working more than me. I'm off this weekend. I'm actually off. I fly out to a ship. I purposefully, before season start, I try to take 2 clear weeks out with no magic at all, just so I can reset and,
Mm.
pack properly and refurbish props and all that sort of stuff. So I'm in that time period now, which is why when we came to, do you want to do this interview? And I said, I'm free all week, any day. I'm actually off until next Thursday. I fly out to a ship, and then my diary is
Chocker.
ridiculous.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's good.
Well, enjoy your downtime, guys.
Thanks, mate.
Thank you for watching. Like I said, leave a comment down below. Drop in drop into the website. Go buy everything that Mark's got. Follow him on Instagram, and I will be back again next week with another Talk Magic. But until then, on behalf of the incredible Mark James, my name's Craig Petty, and you've been watching Magic TV.